In the third month, men from the Censorate suddenly stormed the residence. The entire Zhen household was thrown into chaos at once. The servants fled in panic, and no one had the presence of mind to pay attention to anyone else. I clutched my broom and hid behind an ornamental rock in the garden until Physician Wang found me. He was a kindly, good-natured old man. Whenever I went to collect medicine for Madame, he would quietly slip a piece of candy into my hand. That day, he pulled me toward the rear courtyard, his voice urgent. "Girl, I'm afraid the Zhen family won't escape this disaster. Madame has already given orders that everyone should find their own way out today." With that, he took out a small pouch of broken silver and placed it in my hand. "Take it. From now on, look after yourself properly." Then he hesitated, his gaze turning toward the cradle in the room. "Second young lady is only 8 months old. If an old man like me leaves with her, will attract attention far too easily. If you're willing, take her with you. Don't let her fall into anyone else's hands." I walked to the cradle and looked at the plump little girl with rosy white cheeks, sucking noisily on one finger. I crouched down and gently touched her cheek. She immediately burst into delighted giggles. I picked her up and quietly left the Zhen residence through the back gate with Physician Wang. From that day on, Bianjing gained one more young woman selling wontons. With the bits of silver Physician Wang had given me, I set up a small stall by the entrance to the West Market. It was simple: an old chopping board, an iron pot, and 2 paper lanterns. The lanterns bore the 2 characters for Wonton, written for me by old Joe from the neighboring tea stall. His handwriting was not especially fine and leaned a little crookedly, yet it carried a warmth that was hard to put into words. Beside the iron pot stood 2 earthenware jars, one filled with bone broth and the other with clean water. Every day before dawn, I began making the broth. Pork marrow bones simmered over a low flame with a few slices of ginger and a little Sichuan pepper for 2 full hours. By the time the soup turned milky white, its aroma had already drifted halfway down the street. Neat rows of small bowls sat on the chopping board, each holding filling prepared in advance. Pork thigh had to be minced very fine, then mixed with finely chopped preserved wintergreens, chopped scallions, ginger water, and an egg. I stirred everything in one direction until the mixture became smooth and springy. Only when a chopstick inserted into the center remained standing upright was the filling ready. I rolled every wonton wrapper myself as well, each one thin and light as a cicada's wing. Held up to the light, it was translucent enough to reveal the lines of a hand behind it. Too thick and it lost its delicate taste. Too thin and it tore easily. It had to be soft yet resilient. The first month was the hardest. I had very little silver and could not afford meat, so I could only buy pork bones for broth and sell vegetarian wontons. The vegetarian filling was made from tofu, wood ear mushrooms, and a few chives. The tofu had to be pressed until almost completely dry, and the wood ears had to be minced very finely so the filling would retain some flavor once wrapped. Each bowl held 10 wontons and cost 3 copper coins, yet there were not many customers. I would carry second young lady, who was still learning to speak, to a little chair behind the stall and watch her while calling for customers. I gave her the milk name Ewer. By day, I kneaded dough and wrapped wontons, and my hands hardly ever stopped. Ewer sat in a wooden tub in the corner of the stall, a tiny bell tied around her wrist. Whenever she cried, I stopped at once, gently coaxed her for a few words, then fed her a little rice water. At night I held Ewer in my arms and slept in an old wooden hut deep in the alley behind the stall. Bianjing was never quiet after dark. There was the voice of the storyteller in the tea house, the songs of women performers, the curses of drunken men, and the stealthy footsteps of thieves. I heard all of it, and it only made me hold Ewer tighter. Some people curiously asked why I brought such a small child along while selling wontons. I would simply smile and say, "She's my younger sister." In the second month, after scraping together 80 copper coins, I gritted my teeth and bought 2 gin of pork thigh. That night, when I ladled out the first bowl of meat-filled wontons, I tasted one and could not stop my tears from falling. That bowl was sold to a traveling peddler hurrying past in the night. After one bite, he exclaimed in surprise, "Young lady, your wontons really suit my taste." He proceeded to eat 3 bowls in a row. From then on, business at the stall gradually improved. Every day before dawn, I had to get up, carry water from the well, light the fire, make the broth, prepare the filling, and start wrapping wontons. Wrapping wontons required care. My left hand held the thin wrapper while my right took just the right amount of filling. Too much and the wrapper would split while cooking. Too little and the wonton lost its flavor. Then I folded the wrapper over, pinched the edges tight, and folded it once more. A small neat wonton was finished and placed in orderly rows on a board dusted with flour. Winter was the hardest season. Bianjing winters were bitterly cold, and the well water felt like ice. Every time I reached down to draw water, my fingertips went numb. By then Ewer had just learned to walk. Wrapped from head to toe in thick padded clothes, she looked like a little ball of cotton and often sat beside the brazier. From time to time she would lift her head and call, "Big sister." I would answer, and my heart immediately felt warmer. Summer was no easier. Fresh meat could not be kept for long, so each day I dared prepare only as much as I expected to sell. The moment it sold out, I packed up the stall rather than make extra. On especially hot days, meat filling could begin to turn after only 4 hours. I could only grit my teeth and throw away everything that remained. I would rather earn less silver than ruin the reputation of my Wonton stall because I could not bear to waste ingredients. There were many food vendors on that street selling steamed buns, noodles, baked cakes, spicy soup, and all kinds of other fare. Every shop had its own regular customers. My Wonton stall survived on one thing alone: freshness. At the beginning of spring in the 3rd year after carefully counting my savings, I found that I had finally put aside 8 taels of silver. I wrapped the money tightly in cloth and kept it hidden inside my clothes, together with the little silver lock Madame had once rewarded me with during the Lantern Festival. 8 taels was not a great fortune in Beijing, but it could still accomplish many things. It could rent a small room in an alley, buy a decent table, or pay for several new sets of bowls and chopsticks. I quietly calculated that if I kept saving for another half year, I could rent a tiny storefront near the entrance to the West Market. It did not need to be large. As long as it could hold 3 or 4 tables and a sign reading Wen's Wontons, I would finally become a proper small shopkeeper. Old Joe, who sold tea next door, was over 50 and slightly stooped. In his youth he had traveled all over with merchant boats. Later, after his leg became bad, he settled in Beijing and opened a little tea stall at the West Market entrance, selling large bowls of tea for 1 copper coin each with unlimited refills. Seeing how hard it was for me to raise Yura alone, he often helped watch her. Whenever Yura cried, he dipped the tip of a chopstick in honey water and put it in her mouth. She would smack her lips a few times and immediately stop crying. "That child is blessed," old Joe often said. Yura grew quickly too. The tiny bundle who had once only babbled soon learned to call me big sister in her childish voice. Her favorite thing was squatting beside the pot and watching me ladle wontons into bowls, the rising steam turning her little face red. "Big sister, the wontons smell so good." She would tug at my clothes and I would scoop a bowl for her, leave out the scallions, and keep only the meat-filled wontons. She ate until her lips were glossy with oil. By the time the stall had been open for 2 full years, I had become the little proprietress everyone on the street called Miss Wen. But despite being called Miss Wen, I had never truly had a proper given name. When I was little, my parents never called me by a name. They simply called me girl. The woman broker who took me in later called me the Wen girl. And after I entered the Zhen residence, everyone there followed suit. Yura was now over 2 years old and could already say many things. She chattered from morning to night like a little bird. She even knew how to hand me scallions and ginger. Sometimes she copied me and tried to wrap wontons herself, but her tiny hands ended up covered in meat filling, and what she produced looked nothing like a wonton, more like a misshapen lump of dough. Even so, she would proudly hold it up in front of me and say, "Big sister, I made this." I would smile, rub her head, and boil the wonton she had wrapped in its own little bowl for her to eat. Yura ate it with great relish, completely unconcerned by its strange shape. I wanted to sew her a new outfit. The clothes she wore were still the old ones we had brought out of the Zhen residence that year. After being mended again and again, they had faded badly, and both knees and elbows were covered with overlapping patches. I went to the cloth shop and bought 2 chi of soft indigo cotton. The fabric was smooth and would not chafe her skin. At night, after Yura fell asleep, I worked stitch by the moonlight coming through the window. After 2 nights I finally finished a little jacket. At the collar I even clumsily embroidered a slightly crooked flower. Yet once she put it on, Yura loved it so much she refused to take it off. We did not have much in those days, but my heart was remarkably peaceful. Unfortunately, peace is one of the hardest things in this world to hold on to for long. After the Mid-Autumn Festival, Beijing was still stiflingly hot, and the fragrance of osmanthus filled the city. That day I packed up the stall earlier than usual and carried Yura into the street to buy 2 pieces of osmanthus cake, one for her and one to save for old Joe. Yura ate until crumbs clung to the corners of her mouth, her eyes curving with delight. On the way back, when I passed the tea stall, I saw old Joe talking with several regular customers, but his expression was unusual. When he saw me, he waved me over, then lowered his voice. "Miss Wen, haven't you heard? The Zhen family's case has been decided." My hand trembled, and the piece of osmanthus cake in Yura's hand almost fell to the ground. The Zhen family's case had dragged on for 2 years. It had begun with embezzlement connected to grain transported by river. Lord Zhen was imprisoned, and later the investigation became entangled with the salt and iron case. The deeper they investigated, the more complicated it became, like a skein of knotted thread that could not be untangled. During those 2 years I occasionally heard traveling merchants mention it. Some said Lord Zhen would soon be cleared. Others said the case would gradually be buried. Still others said the Zhen family would not escape disaster this time. Whenever I heard such things, my heart felt squeezed tight, yet I never dared ask too much for fear of arousing suspicion. Old Joe sighed softly and lowered his voice even further. I have a relative who works at the Ministry of Justice. I heard the sentence has already been handed down. Every male of the Zhen family, young or old, is to be exiled to Qinghai for military labor. As for the women, he stopped without finishing. I stood in front of the tea stall with Yer in my arms, feeling cold all over. Yer had no idea what was happening and kept eating her osmanthus cake, her little lips shiny with oil. She looked up at me and asked, "Big sister, why aren't you walking anymore?" I did not answer. That night, after coaxing Yer to sleep, I sat alone in front of the stall until morning. Yer was the child I had carried out of the Zhen residence. Without the Zhen family, there would have been no Yer, and there would not have been the person I was now. But what could I do? I thought all night until my head throbbed. At daybreak, I poured out the pot of bone broth that had gone cold and lit the fire to make a fresh batch. I could not save everyone, but if I could save even one person, it would still be worth trying. The next morning, I left Yer in old Joe's care and took my 8 taels of silver to the human market in southern Bianjing. Bianjing's human market was tucked inside an alley in the southern part of the city. 2 old scholar trees stood at the entrance, with several horses tied to their branches, while people waiting to be bought sat beneath them. Some were selling their labor, some their skills, and some were locked in iron chains. Most were female relatives of officials convicted of crimes and put up for sale by the authorities. Every person wore a tag listing place of origin, age and price, no different from goods displayed for sale in an ordinary market. Some still wore silk and brocade, but their clothes were wrinkled and coated in dust, their smeared makeup revealing haggard faces beneath. Some cried, others remained silent. Those who did not cry had eyes as empty as dried-up wells. My legs trembled non-stop as I entered that alley. Deeper inside I saw Madame Zhen crouching at the foot of a wall with her head lowered. She had become terribly thin. Her once full cheeks were hollow, her cheekbones sharply pronounced, and more than half of her hair hung loose and tangled, held in a rough knot by nothing more than a wooden hairpin. She was still wearing the lotus root pink jacket from years before, but its original color was almost impossible to recognize. The collar and sleeves were frayed, and one knee had a hole in it. Sitting beside her was eldest young lady, 2 years younger than me and exactly 12 that year. Back in the Zhen household, she had known how to ride horses and play pitch-pot, and she used to run through the rear garden chasing butterflies with the maids. Whenever she laughed, her voice had been clear as a silver bell. Now, however, thin iron chains encircled both her wrists and her mother's. I stood at the alley entrance watching for a long time until a woman broker beside me gave me a small shove. "Young lady, are you here to buy servants? These people are all relatives of convicted officials, so they don't cost much. Buy them as maids and you'll get plenty of value for your money." I slowly walked over and crouched in front of Madame Zhen. She raised her head and looked at me, but there was no recognition in her eyes. That was only natural. In the Zhen household, I had been nothing more than a lowly maid assigned to heavy chores. I had rarely even been allowed through the gate of the main courtyard. Madame had always been surrounded by senior maids who served her closely. Someone as insignificant as me was probably never worth remembering. "Madam," I called softly. She froze. A faint glimmer suddenly appeared in her clouded eyes, as though she could not believe anyone in a place like this would still address her by that title. She stared at me for a long time, then asked hoarsely, "Who are you?" I was a maid in the Zhen household. I lowered my voice. I was the girl who swept the courtyards. Everyone called me the Wen girl. Madame Zhen stared blankly for a long moment, before tears suddenly spilled from her eyes. I reached out, took her hand and said gently, "Madam, I've come to take the 2 of you home." The woman broker behind me immediately stepped forward with a flattering smile. "Oh my young lady, you certainly know how to choose. Both of these are relatives of a convicted official. The older one can't do heavy labor anymore, so she's very cheap, only 3 taels of silver. The younger girl can still work and costs 5 taels. If you take them both, I'll make it 8.5 taels. But I had exactly 8 taels in all. I reached inside the pouch close to my body and took out every bit of silver, along with the little silver lock, then placed them all in the broker's hand. "I'll buy both of them. This silver lock is worth a little money too. I truly don't have anything else." The broker stared at me, counted the silver in her palm, then looked at the faded clothes I was wearing. Perhaps she could see that I genuinely had nothing more to give. She curled her lip. "Fine, I'll count myself unlucky today." She unlocked the chains on the two women's wrists and gave them a light push. Go on. Meeting a kind master can be considered your good fortune. Madame Zhen tried to stand, but her legs were weak and her body swayed. I quickly reached out to support her, then helped the two of them slowly leave the alley. Just as we reached the entrance, Third Zhang, who sold rice and flour, happened to pass by. He stopped short when he saw me. Miss Wen, these two are. I turned and looked back toward the alley without answering. Third Zhang opened his mouth to ask more, but in the end he only sighed and helped me lift Madame Zhen onto his donkey cart used for hauling flour. When we returned to the West Market entrance, old Zhou saw that I had brought two people back. Without asking anything, he scooped up a handful of tea leaves, brewed a pot of hot tea, and carried it over. Yuer was squatting in front of the stall with half a piece of osmanthus cake still in her hand, tilting her head as she looked at Madame Zhen. After watching for a moment, she suddenly ran over, held the cake up in front of her, and said in her childish voice, "Eat this, it's very sweet." Madame Zhen lowered her head to look at the little face before her. Her lips trembled, and for a moment she could not speak. Eldest young lady noticed Yuer as well. She stared at that little face for a long time, then slowly crouched down and gently stroked her cheek. Yuer had never been afraid of strangers. She giggled when touched and even held the osmanthus cake toward eldest young lady's mouth. Eldest young lady's tears immediately burst forth as if a dam had broken. I stood beside the pot, still holding a half-wrapped wonton in my hand. At the sight before me, my nose prickled and my eyes gradually reddened. I hurriedly turned to feed more firewood into the stove and used my sleeve to wipe the corners of my eyes. Dry wood crackled, bone broth bubbled in the pot, and its fragrance spread through the tiny courtyard, driving away the chill of the late autumn afternoon. The old wooden hut in the alley behind the stall had always been barely larger than a palm. When it was only Yuer and me, it was cramped but just enough to shelter us. Now with Madame Zhen and eldest young lady added, there was hardly room to turn around. At night, I gave the straw mat to the two of them while I sat curled against the wall with Yuer in my arms. Yuer slept soundly, her little head tucked into my chest like a kitten, her warm breath seeping through my thin clothes. Madame Zhen slept restlessly, turning again and again and occasionally letting out a soft sigh. Eldest young lady kept her eyes open all night, silently watching moonlight slip through cracks in the broken roof tiles without moving at all. I woke in the middle of the night and saw her lying like that. My heart ached without warning. I wanted to say something comforting, but I did not know where to begin. In the end, I merely pulled the old padded coat covering Yuer a little farther toward her. Before dawn I was awake again, lighting the fire, heating water and simmering broth. After buying Madame Zhen and eldest young lady, I had only a few dozen copper coins left. I counted them 3 times but there were still only a few dozen. In the end I put the money into a small cloth pouch and tied it firmly at my waist. I went to Third Zhang who sold flour and bought 2 gin on credit. Third Zhang was an honest man. Seeing the 2 people I had brought back, he only sighed and said, "Miss Wen, use it first. There's no hurry to pay me. The real problem is the filling. You can't afford meat now." I searched the little cupboard in the corner. Inside were half a bowl of dried tofu, a few dried wood ear mushrooms, some glass noodles, and half a packet of dried vegetables. The dried tofu had been bought the day before. It was a little hard but still usable. I soaked the wood ears and dried vegetables in warm water, and softened the noodles, then minced everything, added a little salt and a few drops of sesame oil, and mixed it into a basin of vegetarian filling. Vegetarian wontons were never easy to sell, but I had no other choice. While I was chopping the filling, I suddenly heard light footsteps behind me. I turned and saw eldest young lady. She had changed into another set of clothes, old garments belonging to old Zhou's wife. Their color had faded almost beyond recognition, and one sleeve even carried a patch. The clothes were a little short on her and exposed wrists as thin as dry branches. She watched me for a moment, then came over and crouched beside the chopping board. "What can I do?" I handed her the knife and pointed to the dried tofu. "Help me chop this, the finer, the better." She took the knife, lowered her head and picked up a piece of tofu, but after only a few cuts, uneven chunks of every size were scattered across the board. The sight of her awkward movements made my heart ache. When she lived in the Zhen household, eldest young lady had grown up so sheltered that she had never had to lift a finger around the house. Someone changed her clothes, someone carried her meals to her, and even her shoes were put on by maids kneeling at her feet. Yet now she could not even hold a kitchen knife steadily. I took the knife from her, corrected her grip, then wrapped my hand around hers and slowly guided each cut. "Hold the knife firmly. Curl your fingers slightly and let your knuckles guide the side of the blade. That way you won't cut yourself. Use even pressure, not too light and not too hard." Holding her hand, I guided her through 1 cut, then 2, then 3. The dried tofu gradually became small, even pieces lined neatly across the board. She looked down at them for a moment and said softly, I understand. I let go. She continued making several cuts on her own. Her movements were still slow, but already much better than at the beginning. She worked with intense concentration, head lowered, lips pressed together, a faint crease between her brows, as though she were completing the most important task in the world. I placed the softened wood ears and dried vegetables beside her. These need to be chopped finely too. She nodded without another word and bent over the mushrooms again. I watched for a while. Once I was sure she was no longer in danger of hurting herself, I turned to knead the dough. By then Madame Zhen had also awakened. Perhaps because of all she had suffered over the previous 2 years, her body had become extremely weak. Standing too long made her dizzy, crouching too long left her unable to rise, and even a few steps made her pant. Supporting herself against the wall, she slowly came to the stove and stared blankly at the simmering pot of bone broth for a long time. Madam, sit and rest first. I hurried to pull over a small stool. She did not sit. She only looked at me as her eyes reddened again. Girl, don't call me madam anymore. I'm no one's madam now. I froze, unsure what to call her. She sighed softly. My maiden family name is Liu. From now on, just call me Aunt Liu. I nodded. Aunt Liu. Just then, Yu woke as well. Curled inside her patched padded coat, she crawled up from the straw mat, rubbing her eyes as she looked around. When she could not see me, her little mouth immediately drooped and she looked ready to cry. I'm here, I called from beside the stove. The moment she heard my voice, her hurt expression vanished. She scrambled down from the mat, tottered over and ran straight into my arms. She hugged my leg and whispered, Big sister, I'm hungry. I rubbed her head with one hand. Wait a little longer. Big sister will cook wontons for you. That day I wrapped more than 100 vegetarian wontons, arranged them neatly on a board and covered them with a damp cloth. The broth was already boiling, and the chopped scallions and seaweed had been prepared and set out in rows of small bowls on the chopping board. Regular customers who came for wontons noticed the 2 extra people at the stall and looked curiously at them. Someone asked, Miss Wen, who are those 2? I replied, distant relatives. They came into the city looking for work and will stay to help me for a few days. The customer merely said, oh, and did not ask anything else. Old Joe came over from his tea stall carrying his own tea bowl. He sat at the little table, slapped the tabletop and said, Miss Wen, give me a bowl of vegetarian wontons. I stared at him. Old Joe had never once bought my wontons. He always said he did not like them. This was the first time. I filled a bowl, sprinkled in extra scallions and carried it over to him. Old Joe lowered his head and took a bite, then slowly nodded. Not bad. I knew vegetarian wontons could never be as fragrant or satisfying as meat-filled ones. Yet the number of customers that day hardly decreased at all. There were familiar regulars and new faces alike. Eldest young lady stayed by the stove and helped me carry bowls to the tables. Madame Zhen sat on a small stool, helping me sort and wash vegetables. For some reason, little Yu seemed born with a talent for drawing customers. She squatted in front of the stall, and whenever someone passed, she lifted her little face and called in a soft childish voice, Sir, would you like some wontons? They're delicious. Her voice was clear and soft like a freshly steamed glutinous rice cake. Quite a few people who had never intended to stop found themselves unable to keep walking after hearing her, and sat down to order a bowl. One fierce-looking, broad-shouldered man passed by, and everyone else instinctively moved aside to avoid him. Yu was not afraid in the slightest. She ran over, tugged lightly at the hem of his robe, looked up and asked, Uncle, are you hungry? Have a bowl of wontons. The man looked down at her and froze for a moment before bursting into loud laughter. He sat down and ate 3 bowls in a row. Before leaving, he placed 10 extra copper coins on the table. Buy some candy for the little girl. By the time we packed up the stall, night had fallen completely. I washed the iron pot, wiped the chopping board clean, gathered the bowls and chopsticks, and stacked everything neatly against the wall. Old Joe had just closed his tea stall as well. He came over and handed me an oil paper parcel with the faint aroma of meat coming from inside. I braised a little too much pork offal today, take it home and eat it. With that he turned and left at once, giving me no chance to refuse. I opened the oil paper and found several pieces of pork liver and heart braised in lard. I carried them inside. Madame Zhen and eldest young lady were already sitting on the straw mat, with Yu nestled in Madame Zhen's arms. I set the braised meat in the middle and said, Aunt Liu, Old Joe gave this to us. Hurry and try some. Madame Zhen looked at it for a while without moving. Eldest young lady remained silent too. Only Yu immediately reached out. I stopped her, tore off a small piece of pork liver, broke it into tiny bits and fed it to her. After chewing a few times her eyes lit up. Though her speech was still not entirely clear, she hurried to say, So good. I laughed and took another piece for Madame Zhen. Aunt Liu, eat some. Madame Zhen accepted it, took a bite, and chewed slowly. After a moment, however, tears suddenly began to fall. She hurriedly wiped them away with the back of her hand. But the more she wiped, the more came, until she could not stop them at all. She turned her face aside, her shoulders trembling faintly as she tried to suppress her sobs. Eldest young lady set down her food, crawled over and hugged her. I held her in my arms as well. A long time passed before Madame Zhen gradually calmed down. She looked at me and asked softly, "Girl, I still don't know where you came from." "I was a refugee," I answered. "My mother died on the road, and I don't know where my father went. When I reached Beijing, a woman broker took me in, and later I was sold into the Zhen household as a maid for menial work." Madame Zhen fell silent for a long time after hearing that. I lowered my head and kissed Yure's cheek. "Tomorrow big sister will make meat wontons for you." Yure's eyes immediately brightened. "We have meat now?" "We will," I replied. "I'll buy some tomorrow. But first, I had to find a way to earn more money." Staying forever in that tiny hut was no long-term solution. Winter was coming, and I needed to save enough silver as quickly as possible to rent another room. Even one small room would do so long as it kept out the wind and rain. I turned those thoughts over and over in my head until it hurt and still could not sleep. Eldest young lady beside me was tossing restlessly too. "Can't sleep?" I asked softly. She murmured yes. After a while she slowly moved closer and rested her head on my shoulder. "Thank you." "For what?" "For buying mother and me and bringing us back." She spoke quietly. "Life here is hard, but it's still better than that place." That place was truly frightening. I put an arm around her shoulders and patted her gently, the way I had always soothed Yor. "It will get better. Everything will get better." The night grew very deep. Yor and Madame Zhen were both asleep. Eldest young lady gradually fell asleep against my shoulder as well, but I remained awake. Those words of thanks should have been mine to say. I closed my eyes, and the past immediately flowed back through my memory like the slow waters of the Bian River. After I wandered into Beijing as a refugee, I once lived in the courtyard of the woman broker who took me in. It was not large. Small rooms stood to the east and west with an open courtyard and a well in the center. A crooked jujube tree grew there. More than 10 girls lived in the compound. The oldest were 14 or 15, while the youngest were only 8 or 9. Every day we had to learn rules, household chores, and how to serve others. The broker said that once we learned well enough, she would send us to good families as maids. If we were lucky, we might even enter the household of an important official. I stayed in that little courtyard for more than half a year. During those months, I watched one girl after another beside me being led away. Some were sent to workshops as apprentices. Some went to work in restaurants. Girls with especially striking looks were taken elsewhere, and no one knew where they ultimately went. The broker always said they were fortunate enough to enter good homes. Only later did I hear that several of them had never gone anywhere that could be called a decent household at all. They had been sent to flower boats and pleasure houses in the eastern part of the city, forced into work that could not be spoken of in daylight. One girl could not endure it and threw herself into the Bian River. Her body did not surface until 3 days later, soaked so badly that her face could no longer be recognized. After hearing that, I did not sleep the entire night. Compared with them, my fate truly had been fortunate. Steward Ma from the Zhen household once came to that little courtyard. She looked over the girls one by one, then finally pointed at me and 2 others. "These 3 will come with me." The broker grinned so widely she could hardly close her mouth and kept saying, Of course. Everyone knows the Zhen family treats its servants kindly. I hear Lord Zhen is a scholar with a mild temperament and never beats or scolds those beneath him without cause." Madame Zhen was kind-hearted as well. She was a devout Buddhist and went to the temple to offer incense on the 1st and 15th day of every lunar month. Whenever she returned, she always brought back vegetarian pastries to share with the household servants. That was the most peaceful period of my life. As long as I worked hard, I had food and a place to sleep. I did not have to starve or freeze, and I would not be sold to one of those unclean places. So I always worked harder than the others. I swept the courtyards cleaner, polished the corridors brighter, and took on more heavy labor. The head cook once taught me how to mix filling, and I paid closer attention than anyone. I thought that if I worked a little more and learned a little more, perhaps I could remain in the Zhen household 1 extra day, and have 1 extra day of peace. The head cook's surname was Sun. He was a broad, heavy-set man and an excellent cook, especially skilled at making fillings. Seeing that I sincerely wanted to learn, he would occasionally give me a few pointers. Once he asked, "Girl, what are you learning this for?" "A menial maid like you doesn't need to know how to mix filling," I answered. "What if I need it one day?" Master Sun laughed loudly and said nothing more. The next morning before the sky was fully light, I heard movement by the stove. I opened my eyes and in the dim dawn, saw eldest young lady crouching there trying to light the fire. Firewood lay scattered over the ground. She held the tinder close to a small stick and blew again and again. Smoke had flushed her face red and made her cough violently, yet the wood still would not catch. I hurried over, took the tinder from her, and had the stove burning within a few movements. "Why didn't you wake me?" I asked. She lowered her head, a little soot still smudged across her face. "I wanted you to sleep a little longer." My heart warmed and ached at the same time, and for a moment I could not put the feeling into words. "From now on, sleep a little longer. I'll light the stove." From that day on, eldest young lady rose a quarter hour before me every morning so she could light the fire and heat water first. During the first few days, she often failed to get the wood burning. Sometimes she struggled for half the morning, until the kitchen was full of thick black smoke, and the acrid smell spread over the entire street. More than once, old Joe at the neighboring tea stall was smoked awake. He would throw on his clothes and rush outside, thinking there was a fire. But when he saw eldest young lady crouched at the stove, he could only sigh, shake his head and go back to sleep. Business at the Wonton stall gradually improved as well, and eldest young lady began learning how to receive customers. At first she had no idea how to speak to them. Whenever someone arrived she only lowered her head, cheeks bright red, and after a long while managed to whisper, "Sir, please sit." The regular customers found the sight amusing. Here was a pretty, clean young woman in coarse cloth, speaking softly and moving with all the grace of a sheltered noble daughter. What they did not know was that she had once been exactly that. Little by little she became more natural. She learned to ask whether customers wanted extra scallions, fresh herbs or an egg. Madame Zhen took responsibility for watching Ewer. Ewer was at the most active age and simply could not sit still, always running about and crawling into every corner. One moment of inattention and she could dart straight into the street. Madame Zhen had not yet fully recovered and could not chase after her, so she drew a circle on the ground in front of the stall and told her seriously, "Ewer, you are not allowed to step outside this circle." At first Ewer obediently squatted inside it and played with the little ants on the ground, but before long she grew bored and wanted to run away. Madame Zhen then handed her a bunch of chives and said gently, "Ewer, help mother prepare the vegetables." Ewer immediately sat down and earnestly broke each chive into little pieces until shredded leaves covered the ground. Just like that, another 2 years quietly passed. Ewer grew from a tiny child who could only squat on the ground playing with chive leaves into a little girl who ran all over the street. At a little over 4 years old, Ewer began to care about looking pretty. Every morning after waking, the first thing she did was run to Madame Zhen, tilt up her small face and wait for her hair to be combed. Madame Zhen was very skillful with her hands. One day she styled 2 little buns, the next a braid, and the day after that 4 adorable little knots. Ewer's hairstyle changed every day. Ewer would run into the street with her new hairstyle and proudly show everyone she met. "Pretty, isn't it? Mother did my hair." The vendors around the West Market had all grown familiar with her. Old Zhao, who sold candied hawthorn skewers, would laugh whenever he saw her. "Ewer, how many little buns do you have today?" Ewer immediately tilted her head so he could count them. After counting, old Zhao would hand her a skewer of candied hawthorn. The first thing Ewer did after taking it was run to me. "Big sisters, take a bite." Then she offered it to eldest young lady. "Second sister, take a bite." Next came Madame Zhen. "Mother, take a bite." Only after everyone had tasted it would she finally eat some herself, letting the sugar stick all over the corners of her mouth. Her voice was naturally clear and her words sweet. Whenever she saw someone passing she immediately called out enthusiastically, "Sir, come have some wontons. Wontons. My sister makes the best ones. Thin wrappers, lots of filling and sweet fragrant broth." She delivered the whole line smoothly, as though she had memorized it long ago, though no one knew who had taught it to her. By then eldest young lady had changed greatly. There was a little more flesh on her cheeks, and her complexion had regained a healthy glow. Though she wore only coarse cloth, whenever she stood straight, her posture and bearing were so proper that anyone could tell she had not come from an ordinary family. She had learned to light the stove, boil water, wrap wontons, mix filling and receive customers, and she handled every task with practiced ease. She devoted particular effort to mixing the filling. Over those 2 years she spent countless hours studying it. She revised my original recipe again and again. One day she added a little dried shrimp. The next she changed the type of scallion. The day after that she adjusted the ratio of lean meat to fat. Sometimes I thought the flavor was already perfect, yet she still insisted on experimenting further. After countless adjustments, she truly found her own method. The filling she made now was even better than anything I had prepared before. The meat had to be 7 parts lean and 3 parts fat, minced very finely, mixed with chopped preserved winter greens, ginger water, scallions and egg, with a little sugar added to lift the flavor. Then everything was stirred in one direction until smooth and springy. and finally finished with a few drops of sesame oil. With one bite, the meat juices burst into the mouth, so savory and fresh it felt as if you might swallow your own tongue. The regular customers all praised it. "Miss Wen, your wontons are getting better and better." I would only smile and answer, "I didn't make the filling, my younger sister did." From then on, the regulars began calling her Miss Zhao. Every time she heard the name, eldest young lady blushed and hid behind the stove, refusing to come out for a long while. Madame Zhen's health gradually recovered as well. Though she could never be as robust as an ordinary person, she could at least walk around and manage everyday tasks again. Color slowly returned to her face, and the cheeks that had once been deeply hollow filled out again. Around her brows and eyes, one could faintly see the gentle, dignified mistress of the Zhen household she had once been. Most of her work remained behind the stall, sorting vegetables, washing and cutting them, simmering broth, and watching Ewer. But the thing Madame Zhen was best at had always been embroidery. Her needlework was exquisite, every stitch was tiny, even and dense, and the patterns she embroidered looked almost alive. She took apart Ewer's little padded jacket, replaced the old cotton with fresh filling, and embroidered a ring of plum blossoms around the collar and cuffs. The vivid red flowers made Ewer's fair little face stand out even more and made her look especially adorable. Once Ewer put on that jacket, she refused to take it off. Even when the weather was so hot that heat rash prickled her skin, she insisted on wearing it while running around to show everyone. Later, Madame Zhen began taking embroidery work from outside. It started when Auntie Wang from the neighboring cloth stall saw the plum blossoms on Ewer's jacket and curiously asked, "Who embroidered this?" I told her. "Our Aunt Lu did." Auntie Wang turned the little jacket over and over in her hands for a long time, clicking her tongue in admiration. "These stitches, this use of color. I've been to the famous embroidery workshops in Beijing and never seen craftsmanship this fine." 2 days later, she brought over a piece of cloth and asked Aunt Lu to embroider a handkerchief for 50 copper coins. Madame Zhen agreed. It was a moon-white handkerchief. She embroidered a spray of orchids in one corner, using silk threads in different shades of green to shape each leaf, darker in some places and lighter in others. The flowers looked elegant and fresh, as if they had just been plucked from deep in the mountains. When Auntie Wang received the handkerchief, she showed it to everyone she met. "Look at this. How can you call it embroidery? It looks as if the orchids grew right out of the cloth." Word gradually spread, and more people came to Madame Zhen with embroidery commissions. Some ordered handkerchiefs, some scented sachets, some fan panels, and others asked her to embroider flowers on collars. Madame Zhen turned no one away. She handled every piece with great care and never cut corners. Her prices were low as well. 50 coins for a handkerchief, 80 for a sachet, and 150 to embroider a collar on a set of clothing. Her prices were far below those of the embroidery shops outside. Yet her skill was no worse. Each month, Madame Zhen could earn 300 or 400 copper coins from embroidery. She handed the money to me, but I said, "Aunt Liu, you earned this with your own hands. Keep it." She shook her head. "I eat your food and live under your roof. How could I keep it for myself? If you refuse to take it, I'll have no choice but to find somewhere else to live." I had no choice but to accept the money and save it. Business at the wonton stall became better and better. I bought another pot and several more tables, and we gradually gained a little reputation around the West Market. Regular customers told others, "At the West Market entrance, 2 young women make excellent wontons. The broth is light and sweet, and the price is fair." People came after hearing about us, tried the food once, and became regulars. Old customers brought new ones, and the business grew like a snowball rolling downhill. Every day before dawn we were already awake, lighting the stove, simmering broth, chopping filling, and wrapping wontons. We stayed busy until well past noon, before we could catch our breath. In the afternoon we received customers again and did not pack up until it was completely dark. By the end of each day, everyone was so tired we could barely straighten our backs. But whenever we sat down to count the money we had earned, all the hardship felt worthwhile. After saving carefully for 2 years, adding Madame Zhen's embroidery income, and watching every expense, we finally had 20 taels of silver in hand. With that much silver, renting a real shop could finally become more than a dream. During that period, every day after closing the stall, I walked around the area near the West Market looking for storefronts to rent. I examined 7 or 8 places. Some were too expensive, others too small, and still others were in such quiet locations that hardly anyone passed by. Old Joe saw me walking back and forth every day and asked what I was searching for. When I told him I wanted to rent a shop, he thought for a moment and said, "Try West Street. There's a grocery shop at the mouth of the alley that closed last year, and the building is still empty. It isn't large, but there's a little courtyard behind it. That would solve your housing problem too." I followed old Joe's advice and went to see the place. The shop stood at the entrance to an alley on West Street, only about the time it took to drink a cup of tea from the West Market entrance. The frontage was narrow, a little more than 1 jang wide, squeezed between a grain shop and a cloth workshop. West Street was not as bustling as the West Market, but there was still a steady flow of people. Early mornings and evenings were especially busy. Shoppers going to market, workers coming off duty, and children leaving school crowded the street. Most importantly, the shop had a small courtyard in the back. I went around through the narrow side alley and pushed open the wooden door leading to the rear. It creaked slowly open, sending dust drifting down from above. The courtyard was small and square, perhaps 2 jang across, paved with blue-gray bricks, with weeds growing thickly from the cracks. An old scholar tree stood by the wall, its broad canopy covering more than half the yard. Sunlight slipped through the leaves and fell in bright patches on the ground like scattered bits of gold. There was also a well in one corner, its rim covered in a thin layer of moss. Looking down, I could see clear water below. Along the north side stood 3 small rooms, 1 larger and 2 smaller. The windows were old, but this was still a true home. It had doors, a roof, and proper shelter. Compared with our broken wooden hut, it was better beyond measure. Standing in the middle of the courtyard and looking up at the old scholar tree, I suddenly thought of the crabapple tree in the inner courtyard of the Zhen residence. That spring, its branches had been covered in blossoms, pink mixed with white. Whenever the wind blew, petals filled the ground. Back then, I would stand under it with a broom, sweeping and sweeping without ever seeming to finish. The memory made my nose prickle. The owner of this property was an old man over 60 whose surname was Liu. Everyone called him Elder Liu. His wife had died many years earlier, and his children all lived elsewhere. The shop had been empty for more than a year, and he had not bothered repairing it. When I asked the rent, Elder Liu said 600 copper coins a month. I could not help being startled. 600 coins in rent, plus taxes, lamp oil, and other expenses, meant at least 700 coins every month. Elder Liu, that's a little high. Look, the wooden door is damaged, the window paper is torn, and the roof tiles still need repairs. If I rent it, I'll have to spend money fixing all of that. Could you lower the price a little? Elder Liu looked me over. Perhaps seeing that I was only a young woman, he did not want to make things too difficult. He thought for a long while before saying, 550. I can't go any lower. 500. I held out my hand. I'll rent it for a year and pay the entire year at once. Elder Liu stared at me. A young woman like you can afford a full year's rent? I took out my money pouch, counted out the silver, and handed it over. He weighed it in his palm, then nodded. Fine. 1 year, calculated at 500 coins a month, all paid at once. You may use whatever is in the shop, repair what needs repairing and patch what needs patching. I won't interfere. We drew up a rental contract and both pressed our fingerprints to it. When he handed me the key, Elder Liu looked at me and said, "Young lady, you don't have the bearing of someone destined to run only a tiny business." I smiled as I accepted the key. Elder Liu, you flatter me. Once the shop opens, you must come often and support my business. He laughed, clasped his hands behind his back, and slowly walked away. I stood in the courtyard and looked around, calculating quietly. The year's rent would cost about 6 taels. Repairs, tables and chairs, bowls and chopsticks, bedding and other necessities would take at least another 3. I also needed to visit the cloth shop, buy fabric, and make 2 new sets of clothes for each of the 4 of us, as well as fresh soft cotton for sleeping quilts. Whatever silver remained had to be kept as working capital to buy meat, flour, and seasonings. We absolutely could not spend it all. The shop was renovated for more than half a month, and gradually it began to look like a proper place of business. The wooden shutters were repaired and coated with glossy tung oil, bringing out every line of the grain. The window paper was replaced and sealed tightly so the cold wind could no longer seep through. New roof tiles were laid, so even heavy rain would not make it leak. We pulled every weed from the courtyard and scrubbed the blue-gray bricks 3 times until their original color finally showed. The well was dredged too. The water we drew afterward was crystal clear and even tasted faintly sweet. Of the 3 rooms in the back, the largest went to Madame Zhen and Ewer, 1 smaller room to eldest young lady, and the last to me. The first time Ewer saw a bed that belonged to her, she was so delighted that she rolled across it several times and eventually fell asleep halfway through rolling. A new signboard hung over the shop entrance, once again written by old Joe. On opening day he also gave us a pair of couplets for the 2 sides of the door. The first line read, "One bowl of chaos holds the sun and moon." The second read, "Half a ladle of clear broth cooks heaven and earth." The calligraphy was beautiful and the sentiment grand. There was only one problem. He had written the word for cows where he meant wontons. Third Zhang laughed so hard he could barely stand when he saw it, and asked old Joe what kind of writing that was supposed to be. Old Joe glared at him. "What do you know? Before heaven and earth were formed, there was primordial chaos. This has profound meaning. Third Zhang could not read in the first place. Old Zhou's explanation left him dazed, and all he could do was nod repeatedly. I looked at the couplets and ultimately left them hanging exactly as they were. Quite a few people came on our first day. Regular customers had heard that Miss Wen was opening a real shop and arrived one after another to support us. Third Zhang gave us 5 jin of flour. Auntie Wang brought a basket of eggs. Even old Zhao, the candied hawthorn seller, carried over several packets of hawthorn and said they were snacks for Yuer. The West Market vendors usually minded their own business, but after living side by side for so long, a genuine bond had grown among us. The shop held 4 tables, each seating 4 people. The table by the window was the best spot because one could see the street and watch the people passing by. Yuer loved sprawling over that table with her chin in her hands, staring outside. The stove was built at the very back beside the door to the courtyard, so cooking smoke would drift toward the rear instead of choking the customers. 2 large pots sat on the stove, one for simmering broth and one for boiling wontons. The bone broth cooked from morning until night, milky white and bubbling steadily, its fragrance traveling half a street away. Business improved every day. West Street was not as bustling as the West Market, but it was stable, and most people living nearby were ordinary townsfolk. In the morning, they came for a steaming bowl of wontons before going to work and felt energized for the whole day. At noon, shop assistants from nearby businesses came for an inexpensive filling bowl. In the evening, people too tired to cook after work also stopped in. We could sell at least 200 bowls a day. The work among the 4 of us became increasingly well divided. I wrapped and cooked the wontons. Eldest young lady received customers, kept the accounts, and collected payment. She spoke gently, and everyone liked her. Madame Zhen simmered the broth, prepared ingredients, and watched Yuer. Yuer was responsible for eating and playing. Occasionally she handed someone a ladle, and her chatter and laughter kept everyone amused. The days slowly passed like the waters of the Bian River, calm and steady. But when one opens a business, every sort of customer eventually walks through the door. Most were decent people who came for a bowl of wontons, paid after eating, and left with mutual courtesy. Yet there were always a few whose thoughts were not on the food. Eldest young lady became prettier as she grew. One autumn afternoon after the lunch rush, there were not many customers left. She stood behind the counter keeping the accounts, head lowered, fingers clicking over the abacus whilst she murmured figures under her breath. That day she wore a pale blue coarse cloth skirt that made her skin look even fairer. Her hair was pinned up with a wooden hairpin, with a few wisps falling beside her ears and glowing softly in the sunlight. A middle-aged man finished his wontons but refused to leave, sitting there and looking around. When eldest young lady came to collect his bowl, he reached out and grabbed her sleeve. "Young lady, you're truly beautiful, far prettier than the yellow-faced hag waiting at my home." Her face immediately flushed red with anger and fear. She yanked at her sleeve but he would not let go. Instead he squinted at her with a grin, his gaze traveling from her face down over her body. "Young lady, don't rush off. How long has this Wonton shop been open? Why haven't I ever seen you before?" Eldest young lady bit her lip, her eyes turning red, but she could not get a word out. She had grown up in the Zhen household. Even after all the hardship she had endured, she was still a sheltered noble daughter at heart. She had never faced anything like this and did not know how to respond. All she could do was pull desperately at her sleeve, but the harder she pulled, the tighter the man held on. I stuck my head out from behind the stove, took one look at him, then struck the large iron ladle in my hand against the rim of the pot with an ear-splitting clang. "Sir, if you've finished eating, the door is over there. Forgive me for not seeing you out. If you want more food, I'll cook you another bowl. But if you say another indecent thing to my younger sister, I'll throw this entire pot of boiling water over you. Do you believe me?" Seeing that I was only a young woman, the man shot me a sidelong glance and sneered. "What does it have to do with you? How does my saying a few words to her get in your way?" I stormed out from behind the stove and slammed the heavy ladle onto the table. The tabletop immediately dented. "If you want trouble, get out. My shop doesn't serve people like you." The blow startled him, but he quickly curled his lips into a grin. "Oh, this young lady has quite a temper. I like that." As he spoke, his gaze swept over me as well. "I'll say it one last time." I pointed toward the door. "The exit is over there. Leave now and I won't pursue this. Keep causing trouble, and I'll go straight to the patrol office at the end of the street and report you." The patrol officers in Bianjing aren't idle ornaments. Harassing respectable women and disrupting a shop will get you at least a whipping and public punishment in a wooden collar. By then you'll lose every scrap of face, and still spend several days in jail. Think carefully." The man snorted, stood, pulled more than 10 copper coins from his sleeve, and threw them on the table. "Fine, you win. After he left, eldest young lady looked at the hand gripping my ladle, her voice still trembling. Big sister, is your hand all right? I'm fine. Madame Zhen came out from the rear courtyard carrying Ewer, her face pale. Girl, she pointed at the table I had just dented. You truly are formidable. Feeling a little embarrassed, I lowered my head and wiped the table. Aunt Liu, don't laugh at me. Those scoundrels were simply pushing us too far. If I hadn't stood my ground, I couldn't have kept them in check. I'm so rough that I've made everyone laugh at me. Madame Zhen hurriedly shook her head. Girl, although I didn't give birth to you, in my heart you are just like Zhao and Ewer. You are all my daughters. You carry this entire family on your shoulders and are the one we rely on. But how old are you yourself? You're only 2 years older than Zhao. Madame Zhen's voice choked and she could not continue. Her words made my nose prickle, and I nearly cried too. I turned and filled 3 bowls of wontons, giving one to Madame Zhen, one to Zhao and keeping one for myself. Enough, stop talking. Eat the wontons before they get cold. I had no idea when Ewer had climbed up beside us. She stood on tiptoe clutching the stove, with only her 2 eyes showing. I want some too. I looked down at her and burst out laughing. I filled another bowl, removed the scallions, and added several dried shrimp. 3 months after the shop opened, our life could finally be considered completely stable. We opened before the sky was fully bright each day, and did not close until deep night. A day was divided into 12 two-hour periods, and we spent more than half of them inside the shop. It was exhausting, truly exhausting. But watching the copper coins in the money chest increase day by day made me feel secure. Zhao became increasingly meticulous with the accounts. She hung a small wooden board behind the counter, and wrote in white chalk how much came in each day, how much went out, and how much remained. Aunt Lu's embroidery business also went more smoothly by the day. Her reputation spread so far that she could no longer keep up with the work, so she set a rule. Only 10 pieces a month, first come, first served. In her spare time, Zhao studied embroidery with her. After more than half a year, her work had become quite respectable. The handkerchiefs she embroidered were not as exquisite as Aunt Lu's work, but they had a fresh, elegant style of their own. She especially liked embroidering tiny flowers and grasses, which looked very charming. Aunt Lu began letting her help with simpler commissions. Mother and daughter would sit beneath the old scholar tree in the rear courtyard, one working on larger pieces and the other smaller ones. Sunlight filtered through the leaves and fell across them, making a quiet, beautiful scene. Sometimes Ewer came over to join in, clutching needle and thread and insisting on learning. When the needle pricked her finger, she howled. As soon as she finished crying, she picked the needle up again, stubborn beyond belief. Ewer embroidered for 3 straight days and finally produced a tangled lump of green and red thread. She said it was a chick, but no matter how I looked at it, it resembled a centipede. Even so, none of us exposed the truth. Aunt Lu put the piece of cloth away and said she would keep it as a memento. Ewer was delighted for days, telling everyone she met, I know how to embroider flowers now. One afternoon, when there were few customers, I was crouching in the courtyard sorting chives when I heard a familiar voice from the front. Is Miss Wen here? I froze, set down the chives, wiped my hands and went out. A man stood inside the shop. He wore a gray cloth robe washed nearly white. His hair was grizzled, his back slightly bent, and he carried a bundle in one hand. It was Physician Wang. For a moment I stood speechless. Since the night the Zhen family fell into disaster, and he led me out through the back gate, I had never seen him again. I often thought of him. Without the pouch of broken silver he had pressed into my hand, I could not imagine how an orphan like me, alone in the vast city of Biangjing and with Ewer in my care, could ever have survived. Physician Wang, how did you find this place? He smiled and set the bundle in his hand on the table. It contained osmanthus cakes and several packets of medicinal herbs. When trouble broke out that year, I was implicated too and spent several months in prison. Fortunately, they later investigated and confirmed I had nothing to do with the case, so I was released. Those months in jail ruined my health, and my nephew took me back to our home village to recuperate. I only returned to Biangjing recently. As soon as I came back, I heard people talking about a very good place on West Street called Wen's Wontons, run by a young woman. I guessed it must be you, so I came to see. He looked around the shop and nodded. Not bad. Better than I imagined. I quickly invited him to sit, poured tea, then called Aunt Lu and Zhao out. The moment Aunt Lu saw Physician Wang, her eyes reddened. She walked up to him, bent low in a formal bow, and said in a choked voice, Physician Wang, if it hadn't been for you that year you were. Physician Wang hurriedly helped her up. Madam, don't say that. I only offered a few words of advice. The one who actually carried the child away was the Win girl, and the one who raised her was the Win girl. I don't deserve your gratitude. Jiao also stepped forward and bowed to him. Physician Wang looked at the three of us and sighed. Good, good, as long as everyone is safe, that's what matters. Yura ran out from the rear courtyard, stopped in front of Physician Wang, looked up, and tilted her head. Grandpa, who are you? Me? Physician Wang crouched down and smiled kindly at her. I'm an old friend of your big sister. Yura thought for a moment, then asked, did you bring anything tasty? I hurriedly pulled her aside and gave her bottom a light pat. Where are your manners? Physician Wang burst into hearty laughter again, his voice so booming he hardly sounded like an old man. He took a packet of candy from his sleeve and stuffed it into Yura's hands. I did. I knew there was a greedy little kitten here, so I brought it especially for her. Yura hugged the candy, smiling until her eyes curved into two thin lines. That evening Physician Wang ate with us in the shop. I cooked a large pot of wontons and stir-fried 2 dishes. Aunt Lu steamed a pot of plain steamed buns, and Jiao sliced a plate of braised meat. After the meal Physician Wang explained to Aunt Lu how to use each medicine he had brought. This packet replenishes vitality and blood. This one calms the spirit. This one helps nourish the spleen and stomach. Madam's health has been depleted too severely. It must be restored gradually, not rushed. Brew 1 dose each day and drink 1 bowl in the morning and 1 in the evening. When these are finished, I'll bring more. As Aunt Lu accepted the medicines, her eyes reddened again and she thanked him repeatedly. When Physician Wang left, I walked him to the door. The night wind was cool. Hardly anyone remained on the street and only a few distant dog barks could be heard. Physician Wang had gone several steps when he suddenly stopped and looked back at me. Wen girl, he said, you've done remarkably well. I stared at him. What do you mean? I mean you took very good care of them. He looked at me and spoke slowly. When I handed Yura to you that year, I wasn't actually sure in my heart. You were only a girl in your teens, not even certain you could feed yourself. How could you raise a baby still on milk? Yet you did not hesitate. You agreed at once. After saying that, he turned and left, his bent figure slowly disappearing into the night. From then on, Physician Wang came by roughly every 10 days to 2 weeks. Sometimes he brought medicine, sometimes pastries, and sometimes he simply sat for a while, ate a bowl of wontons, and talked with Aunt Liu. Most of what he discussed with her concerned the past. Lord Zhen's years at court, the former glory of the Zhen family, and the whereabouts of old acquaintances in Bianjing. Whenever those subjects came up, Aunt Lu's expression was always calm, as though she were listening to stories about someone else. But I knew it was not that she felt no pain, she simply did not want to reveal it in front of us. Once, after Physician Wang left, Aunt Lu sat beneath the old scholar tree in the courtyard in a daze for a very long time. I carried her a bowl of white fungus soup. She took a sip then suddenly asked, Girl, do you think your Uncle Zhen is still alive? I fell silent for a moment. Jiao often asked me the same question. Every time I told her he was alive, but in truth I did not know. Qinghai was so far away and so bitterly cold. At the beginning of the 11th month, Bianjing received its first snow of the year. It was not heavy. Tiny flakes like grains of salt drifted down and melted as soon as they touched the ground. Charcoal burned inside the shop, making it warm and comfortable. A padded curtain hung over the shutters, sewn by Aunt Lu from an old quilt. It was not pretty, but it kept out the wind. The pot of bone broth simmered on the stove from morning to night, sending up enough steam to keep the whole shop cozy. Business was even better in winter than summer. In cold weather, everyone wanted something hot. A bowl of wontons, solids and broth alike, left people sweating by the time they finished. When they stepped outside, their faces were flushed red. We could sell more than 300 bowls a day, nearly half again as much as in autumn. But winter brought its own hardships. The worst was the cold. We slept on a heated brick bed, but once the firewood burned out, the warmth gradually faded. Toward the middle of the night, the bed became icy and the room bitterly cold. We often had to put on our coats, feel our way through the darkness to the stove, and add several handfuls of firewood. It took a long while for the bed to warm again. Aunt Lu's body was especially sensitive to cold. The moment the weather turned chilly, her joints began to hurt, particularly her knees and fingers. Some nights the pain kept her turning restlessly, unable to sleep. Physician Wang prescribed a remedy, telling her to soak her hands and feet in water, infused with mugwort, and to roast coarse salt until hot, wrap it and press it to her knees. It eased the pain somewhat, but could never cure it completely. Eventually, the 4 of us simply squeezed into my small room to sleep. Because this was small, it held heat better, and the heated bed stayed warmer. We pasted old cloth over every gap around the windows to block the cold wind. 4 people packed together on one bed wrapped in quilts and pressed close were actually much warmer than sleeping separately, and we rested better at night. Though the 12th lunar month was cold, the shop always stayed warm. One day, an old lady in her 60s came in. Her bearing was calm and steady, suggesting a wealthy, distinguished background, yet she had no attendants with her. She stood outside for a while, quietly studying the shop's arrangement, then slowly entered and chose a table in a corner by the window. I hurried over to greet her. "Madam, what would you like?" The old lady did not order immediately. Instead, she slowly looked around the entire shop. She looked first at me, then at Zhao, who was bent over the accounts behind the counter, and finally glanced toward the rear courtyard where Aunt Lu was. Only after taking everything in did she look back at me and ask pleasantly, "Are you the owner here?" I smiled. "Yes." I introduced the menu on my own. "We have fresh pork filling, napa cabbage filling, and pork with dried shepherd's purse. Fresh shepherd's purse is hard to find in winter, so we soak dried greens and mix them with meat. The flavor is actually richer. You may want to try it." She considered for a moment, then nodded. "Then give me a bowl with shepherd's purse." I hurried to the stove and served it as soon as the wontons were cooked, still steaming hot. The old lady ate very slowly, savoring each small spoonful. When she finished, she took out a handkerchief and lightly wiped the corner of her mouth. Looking at me kindly, she said, "Young lady, your wontons taste excellent. To have such skill at your age is impressive." I shook my head modestly. "I don't have any special ability. I'm only willing to work a little harder than other people." She smiled. "Being able to endure hardship is itself an ability. Many people in this world suffer, but very few can suffer and still build themselves a good life afterward." With that, she placed more than 10 copper coins on the table, braced one hand against the edge, slowly rose and left at an unhurried pace. On the 23rd day of the 12th lunar month, all of Beijing bustled with the atmosphere of the Little New Year. Firecrackers exploded up and down the streets. Children ran everywhere holding melon candy and Guangdong-style malt candy, chanting the nursery rhyme, "On the 23rd, sticky melon candy." Most of the shops on West Street had already closed, so their assistants could go home and reunite with their families. This was the first New Year we would celebrate in our little shop. Business was stable and life had improved, so all of us hoped for a proper, happy New Year. I closed the shop early and took a day off so the whole family could prepare. After breakfast, we went to the market to buy red paper, dorgod prints, peachwood charms, several strings of small red lanterns, new hair ribbons, and sweets for Ewer. We stocked rice, flour, oil, and salt until the containers were full. Dried meat, dried fish, and dried vegetables filled basket after basket. Even the soy sauce and rice vinegar in the kitchen were replaced with fresh jars. The stove in the courtyard glowed red, and heat spread throughout the yard. Aunt Lu hurried about, simmering a pot of bone broth while steaming trays of glutinous rice cakes, until the savory smell of meat and the sweetness of the cakes filled the little courtyard. Zhao and I sat at the table, cutting red paper and carefully writing the character for fortune to paste on the main door and windows, praying for a prosperous new year. The four of us crowded together in the small courtyard. Our hands were all busy, yet our voices never stopped and laughter filled the air. The atmosphere was warm, lively, and auspicious. After the new year, spring arrived and the weather gradually warmed. Ewer was already over 5, so I found a well-regarded beginner's school nearby and prepared to send her to learn her characters. I had considered the matter for more than half a year. Ewer was growing older. She spent all day running through the shop and had learned to help carry bowls and spoons, but in my heart I always felt the time had come for her to receive a proper education. Aunt Lu had been raised as a sheltered young lady and was well versed in books, ritual, and propriety. She normally taught Ewer a few characters herself, but she was not a professional teacher running a school. 2 alleys south of West Street was a private school taught by a man surnamed Chen, a poor scholar in his 50s who had passed the lower examinations. His learning was not extraordinary, but he was more than capable of teaching children who were just beginning. On Ewer's first day of school, she woke before dawn. She rolled back and forth on the bed like a little worm until Zhao woke too. Still half asleep, Zhao asked what was wrong. Ewer immediately answered, "Second sister, I get to go to school today. I'm too happy to sleep." With Ewer wriggling around so much that no one could rest, Zhao finally sat up and combed her hair. On the way to the school, Ewer gripped my hand tightly. Her short legs moved so quickly that I nearly had trouble keeping up. She asked question after question. "Big sister, is teacher strict? Will the other children bully me? What if I can't remember my lessons?" I smiled. "Teacher isn't fierce. Your classmates won't bully you. And Ewer will definitely remember her lessons." She asked curiously. "How do you know?" I rubbed her head. "Because our Ewer is very clever." At once she puffed out her chest and walked with even more energy. Ewer truly studied hard. Every day after school, the moment she set down her book bag, She dragged a small stool into a corner of the shop, and wrote the characters she had learned on an old wooden board. Once the board was full, she wiped it clean with a damp cloth and began again, repeating the process until dark. Even when the shop was packed and voices and laughter filled the room, she stayed bent over her writing, carefully forming one stroke after another, her little brows slightly knitted in concentration. She looked like a miniature adult. After her first visit, the old lady also became a regular customer. She usually came late in the afternoon, after the sun had disappeared but while a pale glow still lingered in the sky. The shop was often crowded then. She would enter quietly, not rush to order, and choose a calm corner where she could sit and listen to your read. Her clothes were always simple, usually gray or brown. The fabric was clearly of excellent quality, but never ostentatious. One day Yor was reciting the story. At 4 years old, Kong Rong knew to yield a pair. After listening for a while, the old lady asked softly, "Little girl, do you know what yield means in that sentence?" Yor stopped reading, thought, and answered, "It means giving the better thing to someone else and taking the lesser share for yourself." The old lady nodded and asked, "Then why did Kong Rong give away the larger pair?" Yor thought again. Because he was filial and respectful. He gave the larger pair to his elder brother and ate the smaller one himself. The old lady only smiled and asked no more. She quietly finished her bowl of wontons. From then on she came every few days. After eating she still sat in the corner listening to Yor read, and then asked a few questions. The questions became harder and harder. Some Yor could answer. Others made her shake her head helplessly. Whenever that happened, the old lady would say kindly, "Go home and think about it. You can answer me next time." Because she wanted to solve those questions, Yor began actively searching for more books to read. Teacher Chen's school had quite a few old volumes. After class, she often stayed behind to leaf through them and ask the teacher whenever she found something she did not understand. Teacher Chen found this unusual and laughed. "Why is a child like you so curious about these things?" Yor answered honestly, "There's a grandmother who often asks me questions. I want to be able to answer her next time." She grew very fond of the old lady, and even showed her the sheets on which she practiced writing. The old lady studied one for a while, then pointed to one particular character. The first stroke should begin a little lighter, and the final sweeping stroke should extend farther. It will look better that way. Then she picked up the brush and rewrote that character on the back of the paper. Her calligraphy was so elegant and well-formed that even someone like me, who knew nothing about calligraphy, could see how beautiful it was. Later, Aunt Lu quietly asked me, "Who exactly is that old lady? She doesn't seem ordinary." I shook my head. "I don't know either. I only know she really likes our wontons." In Yor's second year of school, more and more unfamiliar faces began appearing in the shop, and West Street gradually became busier than before. At some point, several large construction sites sprang up in the area. People said that an important court official was building a country estate outside the western city gate. Bricks, tiles, timber and stone were transported continuously along West Street. Carts loaded with materials passed all day. Porters, cart drivers and overseers bustled back and forth, kicking up so much dust that the whole road seemed hazy. They all did heavy physical work, and my wonton shop stood directly on the main road. The fragrance of broth carried half a street on the wind, and the moment those workers smelled it, they came in to eat. Those travelers from far away also brought every kind of news. One spoke of floods in the south, another of locusts in the north. Some bragged about a recent victory on the frontier, while others discussed a change among the court's senior officials. Truth and rumor were mixed together, and most of it went in one ear and out the other. But a few remarks were difficult to forget. "Have you heard? Prince Qi is returning to the capital." The speaker was a thin man in his 40s with a little goatee. The heavy-set man opposite immediately set down his chopsticks and stared. "Which Prince Qi?" The other man laughed. "How many Prince Qis could there be?" "The current emperor's third son." The heavy-set man was surprised. "Hasn't His Highness been in Yuzhou for years? Why has he suddenly been summoned back to the capital?" The goateed man lowered his voice. "I happened to be sorting vegetables behind the stove, and my hands unconsciously slowed." He stroked his beard, took a sip of tea and said, "That's what you don't know. Prince Qi's return this time is definitely not simple." The heavy-set man immediately leaned closer. "Why?" The goateed man glanced around before whispering, "How many years has the position of Crown Prince been vacant? Why do you think His Majesty still hasn't named an heir? The factions at court have fought endlessly, and none has been able to overwhelm the others. And Prince Qi hasn't spent all these years in Yuzhou merely enjoying himself. He controlled the waters and opened wasteland, turning a dangerous region into a place where the people could live and work in peace. The common people even built a shrine in his lifetime to remember his achievements. With accomplishments like that, would His Majesty really fail to notice? The heavyset man stared in astonishment. A young man who had been sitting quietly beside them finally spoke. But Prince Qi is still only the third prince. He has two imperial elder brothers ahead of him. By the principle of choosing the legitimate or eldest son, surely it still wouldn't be his turn. The goateed man snorted and set his teacup down sharply. What legitimate or eldest son? That's the old way of talking. If His Majesty truly meant to follow that rule, he would have decided long ago. Why drag it out until today? Besides, the first prince and second prince have fought each other for years. In the end, both sides suffered badly and neither gained the upper hand. Now that Prince Qi has been summoned back, anyone with eyes can understand His Majesty's intention. The young man quickly asked, "What intention?" The goateed man lowered his voice further. "Isn't it obvious? He wants to put Prince Qi in the Eastern Palace. I'll tell you something. I have a distant relative who works in the Ministry of Rites. He says the ceremonial guard prepared to welcome Prince Qi is using the highest protocol for a prince of the blood, even grander than the first prince's investiture ceremony years ago. Think about that yourselves." The three men fell silent and only sipped their tea. After a while the heavyset man sighed. If Prince Qi truly becomes crown prince, some of the old cases from years ago may be reopened. The goateed man's hand froze in midair before his cup reached the table. He narrowed his eyes. "You mean?" The heavyset man immediately lowered his voice and leaned closer. "Think about it. Which case caused the greatest shock in recent years? Wasn't it the river grain transport case? That one case destroyed who knows how many families. The Zhens, the Chens, the Zhao, at least a dozen officials were implicated. If Prince Qi truly wants to secure his position, what better way to establish authority than to reopen an old case, clear the wrongfully accused, and win the people's support?" At the words Zhen family, my heart tightened involuntarily. The goateed man shook his head. That case involved too many people. Reopening it would be almost the same as exposing the court's own mistake. Even if Prince Qi wants to, he may not dare. The heavyset man shook his head again. "Not necessarily. You don't understand what sort of person Prince Qi is. I spent 2 years in Yuzhou and saw with my own eyes how he acts. Once he decides something, no one can stop him. Years ago, when Yuzhou suffered a catastrophic flood, the prefect wanted to open the granaries for relief, but regulations required waiting for court approval. By the time an imperial edict arrived, the people would already have starved. Prince Qi opened the granaries immediately and distributed 30,000 shi of grain to save the people. Only afterward did he submit a memorial admitting what he had done. In the end, His Majesty not only refused to punish him but rewarded him instead. Tell me, what would a man like that not dare do? The three fell silent again. After a while the young man cautiously asked, "If that case truly is retried, could the people who were implicated come back?" The goateed man gave a bitter laugh. "Come back." The men were exiled all the way to Qinghai. Out of 10, perhaps 1 or 2 survived. The women were sold in every direction and scattered to the ends of the earth. Finding them again would be harder than climbing to heaven. So what if the case is overturned? The dead cannot come back to life, and those who were torn apart have still already been torn apart. News that Prince Qi was returning to the capital soon spread throughout Bianjing. From the court to the ends of the smallest alleys, everyone was talking about it. More customers than usual came to the shop during those days, though not everyone was there only for a bowl of wontons. They sat at the tables stirring their broth while excitedly discussing Prince Qi's journey. Where had his procession reached? Which great ministers had he met? What happened at the palace banquet? Even the color of the robe he wore that day became material for endless embellishment. Everyone spoke with the certainty of an eyewitness. One late afternoon near the end of the 9th month, twilight had just begun, and only a few customers remained in the shop. I was bent over scrubbing a pot when a man walked in. He wore an old blue robe faded from years of washing and a felt hat pulled so low it covered almost half his face. The moment he crossed the threshold, his gaze swept through the shop and finally stopped on Zhao behind the counter. I set down my cleaning cloth and stood. "Sir, what would you like?" He seemed not to hear me. He silently approached the counter and asked in a low voice, "Are you people from the Zhen family?" Zhao jolted, and the account book fell from her hand. "You? Who are you?" The man slowly removed his felt hat, revealing a gaunt face, hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, and a tangled beard that had not been shaved for a long time. His voice choked. "Eldest young lady, it's me." Zhao stared at him for a long moment before trembling out, "Zhao, Uncle Zhao?" It was Steward Zhao who had once managed the Zhen household. He bent deeply in a respectful bow, his own voice breaking. "Eldest young lady, I came too late." Zhao hurried around the counter to help him up, tears streaming down her face. "Uncle Zhao, how did you find us? How did you know we were here? Have you been safe all these years?" When disaster struck the Zhen family, Steward Zhao happened to be away on business and escaped the calamity. After the Zhen residence was sealed, The servants scattered in every direction, and no one had heard from him since. Just then the rear courtyard door creaked softly. Aunt Liu came out, and the moment she saw Steward Zhao she froze. Steward Zhao. He immediately turned toward her and, without saying another word, dropped to his knees and struck his forehead hard against the floor. Madam, I failed you. I failed master. I couldn't save everyone. I'm useless. Aunt Liu hurried forward to help him up. Don't do this. Get up first, then speak. Steward Zhao kept his head bowed low, his voice hoarse. Madam, I came this time to bring news. Aunt Liu stared at him. What news? Prince Qi reinvestigated the old case. The Zhen family has been cleared. The shop fell utterly silent. No one spoke. Steward Zhao took a breath and continued slowly. His Majesty has issued an edict. Every official who was wrongly implicated back then has been exonerated. Those sent into exile are to be recalled, and all confiscated property is to be returned in full. Master has already passed through Yongzhou. Eldest young master is with him. They are both on their way back to Bianjing now. The moment she heard those words, Aunt Liu went weak. I hurried over and helped her sit down. Her face was deathly pale, her lips trembling, and for a long time she could not speak. Zhao knelt in front of her mother and clasped both of her shaking hands. Mother and daughter could only choke out the same words again and again. They're alive. They're both alive. Steward Zhao stayed for a long time and told us everything he had gone through over the past few years. After disaster struck the Zhen family, he sold several mu of poor farmland and every possession that still had value to pay his travel expenses, then spent years searching alone. At first he remained in the capital, knocking one by one on the doors of Lord Zhen's former students and old subordinates. He knew perfectly well that when power disappears, old friendships grow cold and people's hearts change. Even so, he humbled himself and begged, hoping only for scraps of information. He endured countless cold looks and was driven from door after door. Eventually he learned that Aunt Liu and Zhao had been sold at Bianjing's human market. But by the time he hurried there, someone had already redeemed them. The broker could only say that the buyer was a young woman, and knew nothing else. Steward Zhao searched everywhere without finding a trace of them. In the end, he headed west toward Qinghai. The region was bitterly cold and swept by wind and sand all year. With neither power nor connections, he set up a tiny general goods stall in a town near the military camp and made a living there. By day, whenever soldiers or exiled prisoners passed, he found ways to strike up conversations and indirectly ask about Master Zhen and eldest young master. After nearly half a year of inquiries, he finally learned where the two were being held. Afraid that exposing his identity would make things worse, he did not dare approach them. Instead, he saved every copper coin he could and entrusted the money to an old soldier he knew, asking him to smuggle it into the camp so master and eldest young master might suffer a little less. At this point, tears silently streamed down Aunt Liu's cheeks. Steward Zhao wiped his eyes and continued. Only recently did I leave Qinghai and return to Bianjing. Spent the silver I'd scraped together over the years asking people to search for Madam and the young ladies. Fortunately, my efforts were not in vain. The day before yesterday, at the West Market Gate, I met an old tea seller. After hearing my description, he said it sounded very much like people he had once known and gave me this shop's address. That's how I finally found you. He turned toward me, eyes red. Wen girl, thank you. If not for you, Madam and the young ladies. His voice broke. He stood and tried to kneel to me. I hurried to support him and absolutely refused to let him bow. Steward Zhao stayed for dinner that night. I cooked a full pot of wontons, stir-fried several dishes, steamed a basket of plain steamed buns, sliced a plate of braised meat, and even brought out the jar of yellow wine we had saved since New Year to treat our guests. He must not have eaten a proper meal in many days. The moment he sat down, he finished 2 large bowls of wontons, 3 steamed buns, nearly half the plate of braised meat, and 2 bowls of yellow wine. Only then did color gradually return to his face. When he finished, he set down his chopsticks and let out a long breath. Madam, master and eldest young master should reach Bianjing in about half a month. I only came ahead to deliver the news. In 2 days I have to leave again to meet them on the road. Aunt Liu asked softly, is master's health still all right? Steward Zhao was silent for a moment before replying. He has lost a great deal of weight and aged considerably, but he is safe. Eldest young master suffered greatly too, but he is young. With some time to recover, he should regain his health. After saying that, Steward Zhao hurried away once more. 17 days after he left, Lord Zhen and eldest young master finally returned. I prepared a steaming pot of wontons in advance, along with dried shrimp, seaweed, shredded egg and scallions. I even carefully placed 2 poached eggs in every bowl. Lord Zhen lifted a wonton into his mouth, chewed slowly and praised it in a rough voice. Delicious. In Qinghai, even in my dreams I only wanted a bowl of hot wontons. Eldest young master ate much faster, almost swallowing each mouthful. The moment one bowl was empty, he asked for another. After the meal, Lord Zhen set down his chopsticks, stood, looked at me, and then bent into a solemn, formal bow. I was horrified and rushed forward to support him. "My lord, please don't do this, I truly cannot accept it." But Lord Zhen remained bowed and said slowly, "Wen girl, you are the benefactor of the entire Shen family. You deserve this bow completely." Immediately afterward, eldest young master also rose and bowed to me with equal seriousness. Standing before the two of them, I became so flustered I did not know what to do. That evening the shop closed earlier than usual. Beneath the old scholar tree in the courtyard, Lord Zhen and Aunt Liu sat close together and quietly talked for a long time. Lord Zhen said slowly, "His Majesty has issued the edict clearing us, but there is still no decision on restoring my official post. The Ministry of Personnel submitted the paperwork more than a month ago and has received no reply. Lord Wang, who oversees the case, only said that the old grain transport case implicated too many people and clearing everyone must be done step by step. It cannot be rushed." Aunt Liu asked softly, "Then what should we do from now on?" Lord Zhen was silent for a while before answering, "At my age, whether I regain office matters little, but Jier's future cannot be delayed. Next year the court will hold a special imperial examination. After Prince Qi enters the Eastern Palace, one of the first measures of the new administration will be to broaden the examinations and recruit worthy talent. That child's foundation has always been good. If he studies single-mindedly for the next several months, he may have a chance." After washing the dishes, I dried my hands and stepped into the courtyard. Nearly all the leaves had fallen from the old scholar tree. Aunt Liu had fallen asleep leaning against Lord Zhen's shoulder. He sat perfectly still, allowing her to rest there, one hand gently covering the back of hers. I looked at the 3 small rooms in the rear courtyard and began calculating. 4 of us had managed here, barely. If Lord Zhen and eldest young master moved in too, it would certainly become too crowded. No one knew when the Zhen residence would actually be restored to them, so it seemed we would have to find a larger courtyard house. I mentally counted the silver saved over the previous 2 years. The Wonton shop had grown increasingly profitable, and Aunt Liu's embroidery added extra income. Together, we had about 40 taels. It was not a fortune, but in this district it was enough to rent a decent courtyard residence. Once again, I asked old Joe to help with the search. He had lived around West Street for decades and knew people everywhere. No one knew better which houses were available or which locations were suitable. I explained what we needed: a spacious courtyard, reasonable rent, not too far from the shop, and preferably a large quiet yard where eldest young master could concentrate on his books. Old Joe stroked his grizzled beard and thought for a long time. "North of West Street there's a 3-courtyard residence. It used to belong to a cloth merchant. He returned to his native place, and the house has been empty for more than a year. I'll ask about it for you." 3 days later, old Joe came back with news. The property was still available, at 1 string of cash plus 500 coins per month. I gritted my teeth, nodded and asked, "Can you take me to see it first?" Old Joe led me there. The house stood in Dianche Alley north of West Street, less than a quarter hour's walk from the Wonton shop. The lane was narrow but clean and orderly. From outside, the gate looked unremarkable, but the moment I stepped through it, the space inside opened into a broad, airy residence. It was a 3-courtyard compound built of blue-gray bricks and gray tiles. Though age showed everywhere, the structure remained solid. A large jujube tree stood in the front courtyard, with a few fruits still clinging to its branches. The middle courtyard held a small garden. Weeds had overrun it, yet traces of its former elegance remained. The ornamental rocks were intact. The fish pond had dried up, several peony plants had withered, and only a cluster of bamboo in the corner stayed lush and green. The rear courtyard had 5 or 6 rooms including the main hall and side rooms, more than enough for all of us to live together. Cleaning the new home took 3 full days. Aunt Liu and Zhao restored the middle garden, pulling weeds, cutting dead branches, and rearranging the stones in the dry pond. Before long the entire space looked much brighter and tidier. Lord Zhen sat under the eaves watching the two of them work and was occasionally called over to carry something or fetch a tool. Eldest young master took the eastern side room in the rear courtyard. I moved in a study table, a chair and an oil lamp, then went to a stationery shop and bought him a full set of paper, ink, brushes and inkstone. The provincial examination would be held in the 8th month of the following year. By any calculation, only a little more than half a year remained. Eldest young master did not dare relax. Every day he rose before dawn and read by the first light of morning. Some nights I returned very late from the shop, yet when I passed his window, his lamp was still burning. The Wonton shop kept the same rhythm as before. Mornings were busiest, with people rushing to work stopping for a steaming bowl. Noon came second. Shop assistants and travelers often sat down for a leisurely meal, and some ordered an extra plate of braised meat with 2 liang of yellow wine. By evening the crowd thinned, leaving mostly regular customers. Even after eating, the regulars rarely hurried home. They sat chatting until we began closing, and only then left reluctantly. The old lady still usually visited in the evenings, and was one of those regulars, but we had not seen her for quite some time. Her last visit had been the day before Lord Zhen returned. Before leaving that day, she had smiled and said, "The weather is cold now. These old bones of mine can't stand the chill. I probably won't come often during winter." Sure enough, she did not visit again all season. From time to time you are asked, "Why doesn't grandmother come anymore?" "I still want to read her the new poem I learned." I would smile and answer, "Grandmother is afraid of the cold. When spring comes and the weather warms, she'll return." After hearing that, Yor would often climb to the window, stare down the street for a while, then obediently return to practicing her characters. By the Dragon Raises Its Head festival, the weather had already grown warmer. The spring wind softened, and the willow trees at the alley entrance began pushing out pale yellow-green buds. The shop changed to its spring menu, and wontons filled with fresh shepherd's purse returned. Early-season shepherd's purse was so tender that a light squeeze seemed to release juice. Minced and mixed with meat, it tasted extraordinarily fresh and sweet. There were not many customers that evening. Aunt Lu took Yor home first, while I crouched behind the stove preparing filling for the next day. Just then, the light at the doorway dimmed as someone stepped inside. I looked up and saw the old lady standing on the threshold in a blue-gray jacket, wearing her familiar gentle smile. I hurried to my feet, wiped my hands on my apron and went to greet her. "Madam, you've finally come. Yor has mentioned you every day these past months, constantly asking why grandmother hasn't returned." I hardly knew what to tell her. The old lady entered and sat in her usual place by the window. "I had a bout of coughing this winter that refused to go away. I didn't dare leave the house for fear that another chill would make it flare up again. The moment the weather warmed, I came." "Are you completely well now?" I asked while walking toward the stove. I ladled out a bowl of bone broth and added a little shredded ginger to drive off the chill. I'm well. It's only an old problem. Every winter is like this." The old lady waved a hand and slowly looked around the shop. "Where is Yor?" "She's already gone home to sleep. She has school tomorrow, so she needs to rest early." I placed the bone broth in front of her. "Drink some broth first to warm your stomach. The wontons will be ready soon. Today's shepherd's purse is the first of the season and very tender." The old lady accepted the broth and lowered her head to take a sip. I returned to the stove and dropped the wontons one by one into boiling water. Before long the little parcels floated to the surface, their thin skins almost transparent, showing hints of fresh green shepherd's purse filling inside. I ladled bone broth into a bowl, added scallions, seaweed, dried shrimp, and a few drops of sesame oil, then carried it to the old lady. The old lady lowered her head to look at the bowl and smiled faintly. "Same appearance, same flavor. Taste it and see whether it is still the same as before." The old lady lifted one wonton, slowly blew it cool and put it into her mouth. After a moment she nodded. "The same. That's good. When people grow old they stop liking things to change." There were no other customers left in the shop. Jower had just finished the accounts, put the ledger away, and gave the old lady a small nod of greeting. Just then footsteps sounded outside. It was Lord Zhen. Ever since we moved to Dianshui Alley, he came every evening to escort us home. I had told him there was no need, that West Street was not dangerous at night and we could return on our own. Lord Zhen had never agreed. Every day the moment darkness fell, he appeared at the shop door without ever being late. That day he wore a stone blue robe. After several months of careful nursing and regular meals, his face no longer carried the gaunt exhaustion it had when he first returned, and his complexion had improved greatly. He pushed open the door and was about to speak when his gaze suddenly swept across the shop. The instant he saw the old lady, his expression changed. He strode to her table, straightened his clothes and bowed deeply. "My respects, lady of the Grand Tutor." The old lady merely waved a hand. "There is no lady of the Grand Tutor here, only an old woman who came for a bowl of wontons. Lord Zhen, there is no need for such ceremony." Lord Zhen straightened and pulled out a chair to sit beside her. The old lady leisurely finished her bowl, wiped her mouth with a handkerchief, and only then said slowly, "I've heard about your family's affairs. His Highness the Crown Prince has his own arrangements concerning the grain transport case. Wait patiently. What ought to come will come in the end." Lord Zhen rose and bowed deeply. "Thank you, madam." The old lady said nothing more and left. When she reached the door she suddenly stopped and looked back at me. "Miss Wen, make the shepherd's purse wontons again tomorrow." "I will." Lord Zhen stood by the door with a complicated expression. Only after she had gone far away did I step closer and ask quietly, Lord Zhen, who exactly is that old lady? He was silent for a moment before answering. Her surname is Gu. She is the widow of Grand Tutor Gu, who served under the late emperor. Grand Tutor Gu was once an imperial tutor. He taught the late emperor, and he also taught the current emperor. After the Grand Tutor died, old Madame Gu still often lectured at the Imperial Academy. Her learning is profound. Unfortunately, her only son and daughter-in-law both died young, leaving her only one legitimate grandson. She now lives with that grandson in Biangjing. Every year His Majesty sends people to her residence to inquire after her health. Even the Crown Prince listened to her lessons when he was young. He paused and lowered his voice. Her words carry more weight at court than those of many first-rank ministers. Why would someone of such status love a bowl of wontons from our tiny shop so much? I thought about it for a long time and still could not understand, but I did not want to dwell on it. Some things did not need an answer. Once spring returned, the days flowed quickly like the Bian River. The provincial examination officially began on the 9th day of the month. Before dawn I was already awake and bustling around the kitchen. The shop did not open that day. I concentrated only on making breakfast for eldest young master. I wrapped exactly 20 wontons with finely minced meat, simmered the broth until rich, steamed a basket of plain steamed buns, stir-fried 2 small dishes, and cooked a pot of hot rice porridge. Eldest young master had grown a little thinner. Months of studying day and night had left dark shadows under his eyes, but his spirits were excellent. You awoke too, rubbing her eyes as she asked curiously, Big brother, are you going to take the exam to become the top scholar? Eldest young master crouched and lightly pinched her cheek. If I pass, I'll buy you candy. Yuer blinked. What if you don't pass? He laughed. I'll buy you candy even if I don't. At once Yuer was satisfied and nodded again and again. I carried the bowl of wontons to the table. Eat quickly while they're hot. You still have to leave afterward. By the time breakfast was finished, the sky was fully light. Steward Zhao arrived with the carriage and waited at the alley entrance. Lord Zhen personally escorted them to the gate and stood on the steps watching the carriage slowly move away. Even after it turned the corner and disappeared completely from sight, he remained standing there. Aunt Lu walked over and gently tugged his sleeve. Only then did he seem to wake from a trance. When he turned back, his eyes were red. Let's go, he said. We'll wait for news. Waiting for the results was even more torturous than the months of preparation. Lord Zhen never mentioned it aloud, but every day he went to stand at the alley entrance for a while, claiming he was taking a walk. Everyone knew what he was really waiting for. Aunt Lu laughed at him. When you took the examinations yourself, you were never this anxious. Lord Zhen replied, when it was me, I felt nothing. Only when your child steps onto that road do you understand what it feels like. At the beginning of the 9th month, the results were posted. That morning Steward Zhao went to check the list. Lord Zhen could neither sit nor stand still at home. From time to time he picked up a book and tried to read. Not a single word entered his head. I washed vegetables lunch, rinsed rice for dinner, and wiped the stove again and again. When I was wiping it for the 3rd time, rapid footsteps suddenly sounded at the alley entrance. Steward Zhao came running in. He passed, he cried, panting with excitement. Eldest young master ranked first. He's the provincial first-place scholar. The teacup in Lord Zhen's hand fell to the floor, and tears instantly filled his eyes. Aunt Lu covered her mouth as tears silently streamed down her face. Yuer did not understand what had happened. She only saw everyone crying, so she started crying too, wiping her tears while happily shouting, Big brother passed. Big brother is the best. In the middle of the 9th month, the formal imperial appointment edict was issued. Lord Zhen was restored to his former post as a director in the Ministry of Works and immediately returned to court. Once news of his reinstatement spread, more and more people came to the shop to offer congratulations. There were old friends of Lord Zhen, former colleagues who had attended court with him, and people I had never seen before. They dressed impeccably, brought valuable gifts, politely offered their congratulations, and politely departed. The Zhen family also began preparing to move back to the old residence. One evening, after the shop had closed and Zhao and I had finished cleaning, Aunt Lu came over. She rarely visited the shop at that hour, so I hurried to greet her. Aunt Lu, why are you here? Is something wrong at home? No. Aunt Lu smiled. I came to find you. I want to say a few things. I invited her inside and poured a cup of hot tea. Girl, the old residence is almost completely repaired. In a few days we'll move back. I nodded. I know. Is everything packed? Do you need me to help with anything? Everything is ready. Aunt Lu looked at me for a long time, then gently took my hand. Girl, I came today because I want to ask you something. Go ahead. She tightened her hand around mine, her voice gentle. Come back to the Zhen family with us. I froze. Aunt Lu continued, I've already discussed the shop with your Uncle Zhen. You may do whatever you wish. If you can't bear to give it up, keep running it. You can go back and forth between the two places every day. Everything is up to you. For all these years, you alone supported this entire family. Without you, none of us would be where we are today. You are the Zhen family's benefactor, and you are also our family. She paused before continuing. Once we return, your food, clothing and daily life will be exactly the same as Zhao's. There will be no difference. If you want to keep selling wontons, choose any shop in Bianjing you like. Open wherever you want. If you don't want to do it anymore, no one will force you. Zhao stood beside me and gently tugged my hand. Big sister, come home with us. I drew a slow breath and wiped the corner of my eye. All right, I said. I'll go home with everyone. The 8th day of the 10th lunar month was chosen as an auspicious day to move. The carriage rolled slowly over the blue stone road, its wheels making a steady clatter. I lifted the curtain and looked outside as the familiar shops of West Street slipped past one by one. Old Zhao had not yet set up his candied hawthorn stall. Third Zhang was removing the shutters from his flower shop. Old Zhou's tea stall was already open for business. Old Zhou stood behind the tea counter. When he saw me, he raised a hand and waved. I smiled and waved back. The carriage turned a corner, and West Street gradually disappeared from view. I lowered the curtain, leaned against the side of the carriage, and slowly closed my eyes. You were nestled in my arms, her small body warm as a little stove. I held her tighter. The carriage traveled for a long time, passing through the West Market and East Market, turning through street after street and alley after alley, until it finally stopped before a great vermilion gate. A plaque above bore 2 large characters, Zhen Residence. I carried Yor down from the carriage. Aunt Lu stood beside me, put an arm around my shoulders and said gently, Girl, welcome home. The moment Yor entered the courtyard, she ran everywhere. Before long, sweat covered her forehead. At last she stopped beside the fish pond in the rear garden, clapping happily at the newly stocked carp. Big sister, fish, there's a red fish, and a white one, and even a spotted one. She crouched by the pond and reached down to catch one, soaking half her sleeve. Aunt Lu hurried after her. Yor, come back here. She chased her around several times without catching her. Finally, eldest young master walked over, bent down, lifted Yor with one arm, tucked her under his arm like a bundle of firewood, and carried her away. Yor still would not stay quiet. Her little legs kicked wildly while she shouted, Big brother, put me down. I still want to see the fish. Eldest young master ignored her and kept walking inside. Yor called again, Big brother, put me down. I'll walk by myself. Only then did he set her on her feet. Aunt Lu cared more about finding me a new shop than I did. On the 2nd day after we returned to the Zhen residence, she dragged me out to look at properties. We walked all over the eastern part of the city for 2 days, examined 7 or 8 places, and finally chose a small shop only 1 street away from the residence. It was not large, but it was clean and bright. The stove, chopping board and water jar were already there, and even the tables and chairs were complete. Aunt Lu looked around and nodded. This place is very good. It's close to home, so if you want to come back for lunch, it will be convenient. On the opening day, Yor even wrote a pair of couplets for me with her own hands. The first line read, Wontons are truly delicious. The second said, hurry inside and eat. The horizontal plaque read, Wens. After the new shop opened, I changed my business hours and opened only half the day. That way at noon I could return to the Zhen residence to eat with Aunt Lu and the rest of the family. More than half a month after we moved back, old Madame Gu still had not visited. I thought perhaps she still did not know the new shop's address. Old Madame Gu did not come, but another regular began appearing. He was a young gentleman of exceptionally striking looks, with brows like distant mountains and eyes bright as stars. His entire bearing was refined and elegant. Even standing amid a noisy street, he seemed untouched by dust. Every time he came, he ordered 1 bowl of wontons to eat there, and another bowl packed to take away. His timing never changed either. He always appeared just before the shop closed at noon. On the 10th day he came as usual. After he finished his bowl, I carefully placed the takeaway portion in a food box and handed it to him with both hands. At last I could not resist asking, Sir, do the wontons suit your taste? He raised his eyes to me. His gaze was calm, giving no hint of pleasure or displeasure, and he answered with only 2 mild words, They're acceptable. I felt awkward for a moment. All I could do was lower my head, accept the money from his hand, and ask nothing further. When I returned to the Zhen residence for lunch, Aunt Liu asked about the shop, and I casually mentioned that the young gentleman had come again. Same as always, 1 bowl here, 1 to take away. He really comes every day without missing once. Before Aunt Lu could respond, Yor became interested. She set down her chopsticks and her eyes brightened. Big sister, is that gentleman really even better looking than Big brother? Better looking. I echoed. Then I have to go see him. Why do you need to see him? Obviously I need to see what someone even better looking than Big Brother looks like. Aunt Lu reached over and lightly tapped her head. Eat your meal. Ewer pouted and obediently lifted her bowl for a few more bites, but her eyes kept darting around. Clearly she was already planning something. Aunt Lu had recently become busy for another reason as well. Zhao was 17 that year and would turn 18 the next. In other families, most girls her age were already married. The Zhen family's years of disaster had delayed Zhao's marriage. Now that everything was gradually settling down, the most important matter in Aunt Lu's mind was finding her a good match. She often took Zhao out to attend banquets. Today it might be the birthday feast of old Madame Zhang. Tomorrow, a flower viewing gathering hosted by First Madame Li. The day after that, Miss Wang's coming-of-age ceremony. Invitations arrived one after another, and Madame Zhen accepted them in turn. Every time they went out, she personally made sure Zhao was carefully dressed and prepared. A pale pink jacket paired with a moon-white skirt made Zhao's complexion look even fairer, like a hibiscus blossom just opening above the water. Her hair was arranged in a double coil bun, secured with 2 white jade hairpins, and small pearl earrings hung from her ears. The effect was elegant and refined. Zhao had always been strikingly beautiful. Although the years of hardship had forced her to mature early, they had also given her a steadiness and resilience rarely seen in young ladies raised within sheltered inner chambers. Aunt Lu was also impeccably dressed. She wore a lotus root pink jacket, with only a simple silver hairpin in her hair, yet every gesture carried the bearing of the mistress of a distinguished household. Whenever she returned, she would tell me what had happened at the gatherings. Girl, First Madame Li mentioned Zhao today. She has a nephew who just passed the provincial examination this year and wants to arrange for them to meet. I smiled. That's a good thing. Aunt Liu nodded, then shook her head slightly and sighed. He truly is honest, and his learning is not bad either, but there are too many people in that household. Mothers-in-law, daughters-in-law, and sisters-in-law all live under the same roof. I'm only afraid Zhao is too gentle by nature and will be mistreated if she marries into such a family. Then there's no need to rush. We can take our time choosing. Aunt Lu looked at me, took my hand, and once again brought up the same old subject. From now on, you should go to these gatherings with Zhao too. You're 2 years older than she is. It's time you thought about your own future. All these years you've done nothing but look after us and never once spared a thought for yourself. I get anxious just watching you. My face burned, and even my ears turned red. I hurriedly lowered my head and refused in a soft voice. Aunt Liu, don't tease me. With a background like mine, how could I attend such gatherings with all of you? If word got out, wouldn't people laugh? Aunt Liu immediately raised her voice. Who would dare? You are the eldest young lady of our Zhen family. Who would dare say a single word against you? I still shook my head and answered gently. I understand your kindness, Aunt Liu, but I truly am not accustomed to places like that. If I force myself to go, I'm afraid I won't feel at ease either. Aunt Liu looked at me with both tenderness and helplessness in her eyes. Seeing that I was determined, she stopped pressing me. All right, I won't force you, but I'll still keep an eye out for you. If I meet someone of good character whose family suits you, I'll have you meet him. If you like him, then we can slowly consider what comes next. Her words only made me more flustered. My face grew even hotter, and I could only lower my head and murmur, Aunt Liu, please stop talking about it. One morning at the beginning of the 12th lunar month, I was still busy at the shop. I planned to sell out the morning's batch, close early and go home. Lord Zhen and the eldest young master both had the day off, so it was a perfect chance for us to prepare a few hot winter dishes and sit around the table together for a family meal. I was bent over tidying up when someone suddenly walked through the door. It was the young gentleman who often came to the shop. He was carefully supporting old Madame Gu as she slowly walked inside. Miss Wen, it's been a long time. I hurried forward and asked in surprise. Old Madam, why have you come all the way here? I thought you wouldn't be coming anymore. Old Madame Gu smiled and gestured toward a chair beside her, indicating that I should sit before she spoke. How could I stop coming? After eating your wontons, I've become terribly picky about food. I simply can't get used to wontons from anywhere else. I wasn't feeling well a few days ago and couldn't go out, so I kept thinking about them at home. You have no idea how many times I mentioned Wen's wonton shop, the shepherd's purse filling, the fresh pork filling, the 3 delicacy filling. Every kind is delicious, and I wanted every one of them. My grandson finally couldn't stand hearing about it anymore and said, Grandmother, stop talking about them. I'll go buy some for you. Who would have thought that when he reached West Street, he found your old shop had moved? Fortunately, you had posted the new address on the door, so he followed it here. I turned to look at the young gentleman and immediately understood. So the bowl of wontons he carried away every day had been for old Madame Gu. I quickly asked, "Are you feeling better now?" Old Madame Gu smiled and nodded. "Much better, thank you for worrying about me," I smiled. "The shop is open again and I've added quite a few new fillings. Every season has its own specialties now. In spring there are fresh shepherd's purse and tender bamboo shoots. In summer sponge gourd, winter melon, and fresh shrimp. In autumn crab meat, young lotus root, and autumn greens, all ingredients at their seasonal best. In winter, besides familiar fillings such as pork with napa cabbage, radish with fresh pork, and shiitake mushrooms with water chestnuts, there are also fresh shrimp with crab roe and yellow croaker with pork. They're all delicious." Old Madame Gu's eyes lit up as she listened, plainly intrigued. "Then today I must try them properly. Give me one bowl with yellow croaker and pork, and another with shiitake mushrooms and water chestnuts." I immediately went into the kitchen to prepare them. The water in the pot was already boiling. I dropped the wontons in one by one and covered the pot. When the water came to a boil again, I lifted the lid. Soft white wontons floated to the surface, their thin translucent wrappers revealing the plump filling inside. I ladled in rich bone broth, scattered chopped scallions, seaweed and dried shrimp over the top, added 2 drops of sesame oil, and carried the steaming bowl to old Madame Gu. She lowered her head to watch the steam rise, spooned up one wonton to taste, then lightly touched her eyebrow with one hand and pretended to sigh in relief. Thank goodness, my eyebrows are still here. They haven't fallen off from how delicious this is." At her adorable, slightly mischievous expression, neither the young gentleman beside her nor I could keep from laughing. Old Madame Gu put down her spoon, gently dabbed the corner of her mouth with a silk handkerchief, then smiled. "Miss Wen, this grandson of mine is surnamed Gu. His given name is a single character Che. He currently teaches at the Imperial Academy, so I suppose he can just barely be called a teacher." I froze for a moment, unable to understand why she had suddenly brought this up. Gouche also paused, then frowned faintly and called in a low voice, "Grandmother." But old Madame Gu ignored him and continued speaking to me. "He never cared for officialdom. His father forced him to sit the examinations, but after he passed he absolutely refused to enter the court, saying that official life did not suit him. When his grandfather was still alive, he supported that decision. He felt the boy was too straightforward by nature, and would probably suffer if he entered officialdom, so it would be better for him to devote himself to scholarship. He has now been at the Imperial Academy for 3 years and has taught quite a few students." Guche and I exchanged a glance. We both felt a little awkward and immediately looked away. Old Madame Gu saw it, and the smile in her eyes deepened. Guche gave me a slight nod. "Miss Wen, thank you for the wontons you've made these past days. Grandmother used to be in poor health. Apart from staying at home, she would only occasionally visit me at the Imperial Academy and rarely went out anywhere else. But ever since she tasted your wontons, she has kept thinking about them, and her spirits have improved a great deal. I haven't seen her this relaxed and happy in a very long time." I hurriedly waved my hands. "Young Master Gu, you're too kind. It's only a bowl of ordinary wontons. If old madam enjoys eating them, that alone makes me very happy." The moment I finished speaking, old Madame Gu set down her spoon and smiled at Guche. This boy can speak so clearly and confidently in front of his students at the Imperial Academy, yet today all he knows how to say are polite formalities. Then she turned to me, her gaze warm. "Miss Wen, you're gentle by nature and a fine cook. I expect I'll be troubling you often from now on." I quickly assured her she was always welcome. Not long after the new year, the metropolitan examination drew near. On the day the results were posted, good news reached the Zhen residence. The eldest young master had placed first in the 2nd class. Before long his court appointment arrived. He was granted the title of literary gentleman and appointed to a post in the 2 commissions. Though it was only a secondary 8th rank position, and not especially high in grade, it was a prestigious starting point with excellent prospects, enough to make others envious. Only after hearing Lord Zhen and Aunt Liu discuss it, did I learn that this was a path into the palace academies, and could one day lead to a position assisting with the governance of the court. Countless scholars studied all their lives without ever getting such an opportunity. During those days, Lord Zhen carried a smile wherever he went. His steps seemed lighter, and his back straighter than before. He had endured countless rises and falls in his life, plummeting from a high position to the very bottom, and then relying on sheer determination to stand up again one step at a time. Now he could see with his own eyes that his son had distinguished himself and was capable of carrying the Zhen family's future. The joy and relief in his eyes could not be concealed. Happy events came one after another. With the eldest young master's future settled, the next matter was Zhaoer's marriage. Aunt Liu had spent several months considering the match, quietly asking questions and weighing everything over and over before finally making a decision. The other family was surnamed Zheng. Their son Zheng Cheng'an was the eldest legitimate son of the vice minister of the court of imperial ceremonies. He had devoted himself to his studies and remained unmarried at 19. He had earned the highest imperial examination degree the previous year, and now served as a bureau secretary in the Ministry of Revenue. Aunt Liu had spent months having people inquire about the Zheng family from top to bottom. Only after confirming everything did she finally agree. The Zheng household was small. His parents were both kind-hearted, and there was only one son in the family, so there would be no disputes among sisters-in-law. If Zhao were married into that household, she would be spared many worries. Aunt Liu sat in the rear courtyard pavilion, sipping tea as she told me everything one detail at a time. I've met young Master Zheng myself. He has a proper appearance, speaks courteously, and has an excellent reputation at the Ministry of Revenue. If Zhao marries him, I can rest easy. Zhao sat beside us with her head lowered and said nothing, but the redness at the tips of her ears had already betrayed her feelings. Yu lay across her lap, tilting up her little face and asking question after question. Second sister, are you going to marry someone? Zhao stayed silent. Second sister, after you marry will you still come back here? Second sister, is young Master Zheng handsome? At last Zhao could no longer bear it. She reached out and lightly pinched her cheek. Why are you so nosy? Yu clutched her face and ran away giggling. This is a good thing. I looked at Zhao and said softly, it truly is a good thing. Zhao raised her head. Her eyes gradually reddened. Big sister, once I marry, what will happen to you? I laughed. What could happen to me? But then you'll be all alone. Who says I'll be alone? I took her hand and smiled. Yu is still here. Aunt Liu is still here. Lord Zhen and the eldest young master are here too. And once you marry, it isn't as if we'll never see each other again. Bianjing is only so big. A short trip and we'll be at each other's doors. At that Zhao threw her arms around me, buried her face in my shoulder, and cried like a child. I held her and gently patted her back, just as I used to soothe Yu to sleep years ago. All right, don't cry anymore, I teased deliberately. If you cry until your face is a mess and young Master Zheng comes to see you tomorrow, won't he think our Zhen family has been bullying you? Zhao laughed through her tears and lightly smacked my shoulder. In the 6th lunar month, the Zheng family delivered the betrothal gifts, 100 loads in all. The procession, draped in red silk, stretched along the entire street, drawing the surrounding residents out to watch. Aunt Liu carefully checked the gift list item by item, then nodded slightly. The Zheng family is truly sincere. Such complete formalities show that they genuinely value Zhao. On the day Zhao married, I also saw young Master Zheng from a distance. He was indeed refined in appearance, tall and upright, and gentle in manner. One glance was enough to tell that he was a promising young man who understood proper etiquette. During the wedding procession, he treated Zhao with exceptional gentleness, thoughtful and careful in every word and action. I had also heard beforehand that he kept no bedchamber maid, and had never taken a concubine. Everyone said Zhao had truly found a good marriage this time, and would surely be able to live a peaceful, harmonious life. After the Mid-Autumn Festival in the 8th lunar month, the weather gradually cooled. I finished tidying the shop and returned to the rear courtyard. The moment I stepped inside, I saw Aunt Liu sitting in the pavilion, smiling and beckoning me over. Girl, come sit down. I have something to tell you. I went over and sat beside her. Aunt Liu, what is it? Aunt Liu opened the Zhen family genealogy lying beside her and turned to a blank page. Her voice was gentle. Girl, your Uncle Zhen and I have discussed it. We'll choose an auspicious day and enter your name into the family genealogy. I stared at her, stunned, not understanding at first. Aunt Liu, what did you just say? She looked at me and said slowly, I want to take you as my daughter. She clasped my hand. From now on, you will rightfully be the Zhen family's eldest young lady. Aunt Liu, My throat tightened and I could not continue. She drew me into her arms and said softly, this is a great happy occasion. Without you, this family would have fallen apart long ago. Now that the Zhen family has risen again, no one has the right to look down on you. Leaning against her, I could not stop the tears from falling. I was both overjoyed and deeply moved, yet I had no idea what to say. All I could do was cry silently. At some point Yu ran over and tilted her head at us. When she saw Aunt Liu's red eyes and saw that I was crying too, the little girl immediately frowned and muttered in confusion, why is everyone crying again? I crouched down, pulled Yu into my arms, and buried my face against her small shoulder. Big sister is happy today, I said, my voice choked with tears. You can cry when you're happy too. Yu still did not seem to understand, but she patted my back with her little hand like an adult comforting a child. All right, then cry for a little while. When you're done, we'll go eat. She made me burst out laughing, and I ended up laughing and crying at the same time. Aunt Liu chose an auspicious day and personally held the ceremony to enter me into the Zhen family genealogy at the ancestral hall. Lord Zhen stood solemnly before the ancestral tablets with incense in his hands and led the entire household in reporting the matter to the ancestors. The young woman surnamed Wen did not abandon the Zhen family when calamity befell us years ago. She shouldered our affairs alone, protected the members of this household, and sustained the livelihood of our entire family. The debt we owe her runs deeper than blood kinship. My wife and I have now agreed to take her as our daughter, enter her name into the Zhen family genealogy, and rename her Zhen Shui. From this day forward she is a legitimate daughter of the Zhen family, no different from our own flesh and blood. She shall receive the protection of the clan and share in carrying the Zhen family line forward. From that moment on, I officially became the Zhen family's eldest young lady in name and right. After thinking about it for a very long time, I once considered closing the Wonton shop that had been part of my life for so many years. In the past I had been someone with no one to rely on. I opened the shop partly to earn a living and partly to save a little silver. Life had been hard, but I had also been free and at ease. Now, however, my status was different. Every word I spoke and every action I took was tied to the honor of the Zhen family. I worried that if I continued standing at the shop front doing business, outsiders would gossip and the family's reputation might suffer. To my surprise, when Mother learned what I was thinking, she immediately took my hand and asked, "The business is doing so well, why would you want to close it? You enjoy this work and are happy every day. Why force yourself to give it up?" I told her all the worries in my heart. After listening, Mother merely smiled and lightly tapped my forehead. "You think too much. Why should you care about empty formalities like those? Our Zhen family has never placed much importance on such things. You only need to do what you enjoy, live the life you want, and be happy and at ease. Don't make yourself suffer because of other people's opinions." At Mother's words, the worries in my heart gradually faded, and the Wonton shop continued operating as before. After that, old Madame Gu came even more often. Every few days, she would arrive with Guche, order a steaming bowl of wontons, sit for about an hour, and only then leave. One day, after slowly finishing a bowl, old Madame Gu put down her spoon, looked at me and sighed. "Miss Shen, this grandson of mine is good in every way except that he's far too quiet. He's exactly like his father and hardly says a few words all day. He teaches at the Imperial Academy, and I hear his students secretly call him the cold-faced teacher behind his back. Don't you think that's funny?" For a moment, I had no idea how to answer and could only sit there with an awkward smile. Guche, who had been sitting silently to one side, finally spoke in resignation. "Grandmother, I'm still sitting right here." Old Madame Gu did not care in the slightest. "So you heard me. Did I say anything untrue?" She went on unhurriedly. "It is a fact that you're a man of few words." Then she turned back to me. "Miss Shen, how old are you this year?" I answered, "I'll be 20 after the new year." The moment she heard that, she immediately asked, "20 already? It's time to think about marriage. Has any family made arrangements for you yet?" Embarrassed, I lowered my head and answered softly, "Not yet." Old Madame Gu gave a quiet hum, her gaze seeming to drift toward Guche beside her. Guche noticed it at once. He put down his spoon and said calmly, "Grandmother, it's getting late, we should return home." Old Madame Gu looked at his faintly hurried expression, amusement appearing in her eyes, and nodded repeatedly. All right, let's go home." Leaning on her cane, she slowly walked toward the door, but after only a few steps she suddenly turned back and gave me a little wink. At the beginning of the 9th lunar month, news suddenly spread through the capital and drew the attention of many people. On the double 9th festival, old Madame Gu of Grand Tutor Gu's household would host an autumn banquet and invite the capital's noble ladies and young women to attend. As soon as the news spread, everyone in the Zhen residence began talking about it. Everyone knew that since Grand Tutor Gu's death, old Madame Gu had rarely appeared at outside social gatherings, much less personally hosted a banquet. Even palace banquets were invitations she usually declined with tact. Distinguished families in the capital had sent her invitations many times, yet few ever succeeded in seeing her. For someone who had lived so quietly for years and almost never attended banquets to suddenly host an autumn gathering herself was truly astonishing. A few days later, Mother came to me smiling. "On the double 9th festival, old Madame Gu is holding an autumn banquet. The invitation has already been delivered to our residence." The moment I heard that, I lowered my head. "Then Mother can go. I don't need to." Mother looked at me as if she had expected that answer all along and said helplessly, "Silly girl, this invitation was specifically sent for you. It would actually be discourteous not to go. Besides, you're now the eldest young lady of the Zhen family. Sooner or later, you'll have to become accustomed to occasions like this." I did not know what to say and remained silent. Seeing my hesitation, mother gently advised me, "Don't always think so little of yourself. Old Madame Gu personally invited you. That alone shows how genuinely fond of you she is. The guests that day will all be well-bred ladies and young women from respectable families. You don't need to be overly nervous. You're gentle by nature and thoughtful in everything you do. As long as you remain yourself, that's enough. You don't need to worry so much about external things." In the end, I nodded. "I understand, mother." In the blink of an eye, the double ninth festival arrived. The sky was high and brilliantly clear, without a cloud for miles. The Gu residence stood in a quiet, elegant part of the capital. The courtyard was filled with autumn chrysanthemums, clump after clump, their delicate fragrance drifting throughout the garden. The guests coming and going that day were all ladies and young women from distinguished families. They wore splendid silks and brocades, their faces exquisitely made up, and every word and gesture carried the composed grace of women raised in eminent households. I walked beside mother with my eyes slightly lowered, still unable to shake a certain unfamiliarity with it all. As soon as we passed the inner gate, a smiling senior maid came forward to welcome us and respectfully led us toward the chrysanthemum pavilion in the garden. As she walked, she said, "Madame Zhen, eldest Miss Zhen, you've finally arrived. Old Madame has been waiting for you since early this morning." The moment we reached the pavilion, old Madame Gu saw us and broke into a smile. She beckoned to me. "Shoo girl, come here to me." Everyone in the pavilion immediately turned to look at me. My cheeks grew warm, but remembering mother's instructions, I composed my clothing, stepped forward, and bowed properly to old Madame Gu. My movements could not yet be called completely practiced, but they were still respectful and proper. Old Madame Gu took my hand and drew me down beside her, then smiled at the people around us. "This is the Zhen family's eldest young lady I've told you about. She has a gentle disposition, a kind heart and hands capable of making bowls of wontons no one can forget. You should all visit with her often in the future." The ladies and young women smiled and agreed. Some time into the banquet, the senior attendant beside old Madame Gu stepped forward, bowed to everyone in the pavilion, and said gently, "Ladies and young misses, please excuse us. It is time for old Madame to take her medicine, and she needs to rest for a while. Please continue enjoying the flowers, tea and pastries. Old Madame will return later." With that, she supported old Madame Gu out of the garden. I had not been sitting long when a pretty young maid approached and bowed slightly. "Eldest Miss Zhen, old Madame asks you to come see her. She has a few words she would like to say to you privately." I followed the maid through the flower hall and around to a warm side chamber. The moment the door opened, warmth rushed out and drove away the slight autumn chill. As soon as I stepped inside, my whole body relaxed. Old Madame Gu was sitting on a cushioned couch. When she saw me enter, she immediately smiled and called, "Shoo girl, come here." I went to her side and bowed according to proper etiquette. Old Madame Gu reached out and gently stroked my cheek. "Good child, you look so pretty today." Then she turned and signaled to the senior attendant beside her. The woman immediately brought an exquisite brocade box over to me. Old Madame Gu opened it herself. Inside lay a green jade hairpin, its color soft and lustrous, the carving exceptionally delicate. She said slowly, "This hairpin was given to me years ago by the old matriarch of the Gu family. It has been with me for decades. I'm old now and no longer suited to wearing things like this. I'll give it to you. You're still young. It will look beautiful in your hair." I hurriedly shook my head. "Old Madam, this is far too precious. I truly can't accept it. If I tell you to take it, then take it." Old Madame Gu deliberately put on a stern expression. "If you refuse, won't it seem as though you think my old things aren't good enough for you? It's only a small token of my affection. You must keep it." Seeing that she had made up her mind, I could not politely refuse again and could only accept it with a blush. Only then did she smile in satisfaction and take my hand once more. "But I'm not giving it to you for nothing. I have one more thing to ask of you." I immediately sat a little straighter and answered softly, "Please tell me, old madam. If it's something I can do, I'll certainly do my best." Old Madame Gu sighed faintly. "The weather is getting colder, and it isn't as easy for me to get around as it used to be, but I keep thinking about the taste of your wontons. If you have time in the future, could you make me a bowl and bring it to the residence yourself? That way I can eat what you make, and I'll also have someone to chat with for a while. If Ewer is free, bring her too. It would make things a little livelier for me." I immediately smiled and nodded. "Don't worry, old madam. I'll remember. I'll come visit you often from now on, and I'll bring wontons too." After the autumn banquet on the double ninth festival, I always remembered the promise I had made old Madame Gu. Every few days I personally prepared a portion of wontons and carefully delivered them to the Gu residence. I deliberately chose the freshest ingredients of the autumn season. Sometimes I made minced chicken with shiitake mushrooms, tender and delicately sweet. Other times I used fresh pork mixed with crab roe, rich but not greasy. Now and then, I tried new combinations as well, changing the flavors so old Madame Gu would not grow tired of them. Each time, I packed the wontons and broth separately and poured the soup over them only after arriving, so the wrappers would not lose their texture from soaking too long. I always wrapped the outside of the food box in a thick layer of cotton cloth and tied it securely. During the journey, I even held it in my arms to keep it warm. By carriage, the trip from the Zhen residence to the Gu residence took less than the time needed to drink half a cup of tea. Whenever the carriage stopped at the gate, the guards already recognized me and immediately welcomed me with smiles. I crossed the front courtyard, passed through the middle courtyard, and went all the way to the rear courtyard where old Madame Gu lived. Matron Zhou was already waiting beneath the covered walkway. As soon as she saw me, she smiled and took the food box from my hands. Old Madam has mentioned you several times since this morning. She kept saying eldest Miss Shen must be nearly here and even sent me out to look. I followed Matron Zhou into the warm side chamber. Old Madame Gu was reclining on the bed. The moment she saw me she waved happily. "Shu girl, you're here? Come in quickly, it's cold outside." I bowed and greeted her, then sat in the chair beside the bed. Matron Zhou took the wontons from the food box and poured piping hot broth over them. White steam rose in a cloud, and the familiar fragrance quickly filled the room. Old Madame Gu closed her eyes slightly, breathed in deeply and smiled. That's the smell. I've missed it for so many days." She ate slowly while I sat beside her and chatted. Sometimes I told her stories from the shop. Other times I talked about Yur's studies. Old Madame Gu listened intently, always smiling. While we were speaking, a young maid entered quietly and reported, "Young Master Gu has come to pay his respects." Old Madame Gu immediately smiled and told her to invite him in. Before long, Gu Che entered. He wore a pale long robe that day, his tall figure elegant and refined. As soon as he came in, he respectfully bowed to old Madame Gu. "Since you're here, sit down. Zhu girl happens to be here too. Keep us company for a while." Old Madame Gu pointed to a chair nearby. Gu Che answered softly and sat down. He quietly lifted his teacup and only occasionally added a few words to the conversation. After a while, old Madame Gu rubbed her forehead, deliberately looking tired, and said to Matron Zhou, "I'm a little weary. I want to go inside and rest for a while." Matron Zhou immediately helped her into the inner room, leaving only Gu Che and me in the side chamber. I sat upright in my chair with both hands on my knees, unconsciously kneading the handkerchief between my fingers. Suddenly unsure what to say. Gu Che was silent too. The entire room became so quiet that the only sound was the soft crackle of glowing coals. After a long while, Gu Che finally spoke in a low voice. "Grandmother likes you very much." I paused, then replied, "Old Madam is kind-hearted and has always treated me very well. I've always respected her deeply too." Gu Che said nothing more and merely lowered his head to drink his tea. A little later, Matron Zhou came back out and said, "Old Madam has fallen asleep." I quickly stood, packed the food box on the table, and said, "In that case I won't stay and disturb her any longer. I'll take my leave." I had just turned to go when Gu Che stood as well. "I'll see you out." I turned back and hurriedly said, "There's no need to trouble yourself, young Master Gu. Matron Zhou can show me out." But he seemed not to hear me and simply walked quietly out of the side chamber. Seeing this, Matron Zhou covered her mouth with a small smile, bowed to me, and withdrew into the inner room. I had no choice but to follow him. From the side chamber to the main gate, we had to cross 2 courtyards. The distance was not far, yet Gu Che deliberately walked very slowly. Unable to think of a suitable topic, I casually asked, "Have you been busy teaching at the Imperial Academy lately?" He answered, "It's been manageable." I asked again, "Do your students listen to you?" "Some do, some don't." "What do you do if they don't?" "Make them copy texts as punishment." "Which text?" "The Book of Rites." Hearing that, I could not help imagining the scene and gave a quiet laugh. Gu Che turned to look at me. "What are you laughing at?" "Nothing," I said. "I just think being a teacher isn't easy either." He did not answer and merely kept walking. By the time we reached the main gate, my carriage was already waiting. I climbed in, lifted the curtain, and turned back to say goodbye. Gu Che gave a slight nod and said only, "Take care on the road." From then on, every 7 or 8 days, I went to the Gu residence to deliver wontons. Those peaceful days continued throughout the winter. Winter passed quickly, like a steaming bowl of wontons. Before I had time to savor it, I had already reached the bottom. On the day of the Little New Year, the Zhen family made offerings to the kitchen god. We all ate malt candy and then gathered in the warm rear chamber for tea. Father, who rarely had leisure time, sat in the seat of honor and slowly enjoyed his tea. Mother reclined on a cushioned couch, peeling tangerines as she rested. Yor was curled up in my arms, her eyelids drooping with sleep. Zhao had returned from the Zheng household and sat with an embroidery frame in her hands, only occasionally making a few stitches. Outside the window, Snow fell in a white blur, covering the bare branches in the courtyard. A charcoal brazier warmed the room, and the scent of tangerine mingled with the faint smell of charcoal smoke, making everyone feel deeply at ease. Father suddenly asked, "Sure, has old Madame Gu been well lately?" I quickly answered, "She's been very well. Her appetite is much better than before too." Father lifted his teacup and took a sip. "Old Madame Gu is a woman of great standing and virtue. Being favored by her is a blessing for you." After a moment of silence he seemed to ask casually, "Have you met that young master of the Gu family?" I answered, "A few times. Sometimes he comes to pay his respects to old Madame while I'm there, so we've exchanged a few words." Father looked at me. "What do you think of him?" "He's very good." Mother smiled faintly and continued slowly, "What your father means is that young Master Gu is a man of good character and comes from an excellent family. If the two families truly have such a fate—" Zhao hurriedly interrupted, "Mother, stop talking. Big sister's whole face is red already." Yuer, who had been lying in my arms, immediately raised her head and stared at me. Tilting her head, she asked, "Big sister, your face is so red, are you sick?" She reached up to touch my forehead, then touched her own and said with great seriousness, "You're not hot." The instant she finished, everyone in the room burst out laughing. I was so embarrassed I wanted to find somewhere to hide. "I'm not blushing," I tried to explain. "The room is just a little warm." Yuer poked her head out of my arms again and said with complete honesty, "Big sister, it isn't that warm. I think it's just right." I could not resist giving her a light pinch. She yelped, pouted, and obediently fell silent. Father drew back his smile, lifted his cup, and took another sip of tea. "The Gu family is an old and eminent house. Grand Tutor Gu once served as the emperor's teacher and held extremely high standing at court. Young Master Gu now teaches at the Imperial Academy. Although he has not entered official service, the Gu family's reputation remains. Our Zhen family may no longer possess its former splendor, but we are still a proper family of officials. If both sides are willing, this truly would be a good match." I lowered my head, my fingers unconsciously worrying the strip of tangerine peel in my hand. "Father, you're thinking too far ahead." "Not far at all," Father replied. "You're of marriageable age now, and Zhao has already married. Naturally, we must think about your future too." Mother spoke gently from beside him. "Your father is right. We've always kept your marriage in mind. We didn't bring it up before because the Zhen family had only just regained its footing, and we were afraid of putting pressure on you. But everything is settled now. It's time you thought about yourself too." At those words my nose prickled and my eyes stung with tears. Back when I was only a maidservant in the Zhen household, my status was low and I had no right to decide anything for myself. I never dared think about the future. I only hoped each day would pass safely. Later, after I left with Yuer, the two of us depended on each other through those difficult years. All I thought about was how to earn enough money and raise the child to adulthood. I dared even less to dream of having a home of my own. Then I opened the Wonton shop. Every day was consumed by making a living, and all my thoughts went toward keeping food on the table and clothes on everyone's backs. But now everything was different. I had parents who truly loved me, relatives who always cared about me, and a place to return to. I no longer had to hold everything up by myself. Their concern for me and the thought they put into my future left my heart both warm and deeply moved. I could only lower my head and struggle to hold back the tears gathering in my eyes, unable to say anything for a while. When spring returned, Bianjing gradually came alive again. Tender shepherd's purse began to sprout. In the fields, along roadsides, at the foot of walls, and even between cracks in the stones, clumps of fresh green appeared one after another, so tender they seemed full of juice at the slightest touch. I gathered a full basket, washed the greens, chopped them finely for filling, and made the first bowl of early spring shepherd's purse wontons. After eating them, old Madame Gu narrowed her eyes with a smile. "Spring has returned." I smiled too. Yes, spring truly is here. When I returned from the Gu residence, I changed my clothes and went to the garden to find Mother. She was sitting in the pavilion embroidering. Yuer lay across her knees, studying the pattern on the embroidery frame, while firing one question after another. The instant she saw me, Yuer sat up and ran over. "Big sister, I memorized the peach tree today. Let me recite it for you." "All right, go ahead." I smiled. Yuer stood straight, cleared her throat, and recited solemnly, "The peach tree is young and graceful, its blossoms radiant. This maiden goes to her new home. May she bring harmony to her household." When she finished, she looked at me expectantly. I said, "Very good. Do you understand what the poem means?" "Of course," Yuer answered at once. "It's about a young woman getting married." Then she looked at Mother, looked back at me, rolled her eyes thoughtfully a few times, and asked with a mischievous grin, "Big sister, then when are you getting married?" My face immediately grew hot. "What does a little child like you know? Don't talk nonsense." I lightly tapped her on the head. Yuer clutched her head and muttered in protest, I wasn't talking nonsense. The other day when people from the Gu family came, I hid behind the screen and heard everything. Your mother put down her embroidery frame and called her name gently. Your immediately clamped her mouth shut, stuck out her tongue, and quickly ran away. The pavilion fell quiet. Mother looked at me and said softly, "Sure, the Gu family has already sent a matchmaker to our door." My heart suddenly began to beat faster. For a moment all I could manage was a quiet, "Oh, yes." Mother suppressed a smile. "Is yes all you have to say?" I lowered my head. Beneath the table, my fingers twisted my handkerchief over and over. After a while I finally asked softly, "Then what did they say?" Mother replied, "The Gu family sent an official matchmaker. Every formality was observed, and their attitude was extremely sincere. The man they are asking to marry you is young Master Gu, Gu Che. Old Madame Gu is especially fond of you, and even said that if you marry into the Gu family, she will never allow you to suffer the slightest grievance." My face burned bright red all the way to my ears. I asked quietly, "Then what do father and mother think?" Mother said, "Your father says young Master Gu is upright, comes from an honorable family, and is deeply learned. He is someone to whom you could entrust your life." Mother took my hand and said gently, "Sure, this concerns your entire life. Your father's opinion and mine are only for your consideration. The final decision is still yours." My eyes prickled. I whispered, "Mother, I'll do as you say." Emotion gradually appeared in Mother's eyes as well, and she gently patted the back of my hand twice. "Good, good." She stood and started toward the study, but after only a few steps she turned back with a smile. "When your father hears your answer, I can't imagine how delighted he'll be." The news quickly spread throughout the Zhen household. As expected, the first person to run and find me was Yuer. She pushed open the door, her face glowing with excitement. "Big sister, I secretly heard father and mother say you're getting married. Is it true?" I lightly flicked her forehead. "If you were eavesdropping, how do you still dare announce it so loudly?" Yuer covered her forehead and giggled, then climbed onto the bed and sat facing me. She cupped my face in both little hands, studied me carefully from left to right for a long time, and finally said with complete seriousness, "Big sister, you look especially beautiful today." I laughed. "Aren't I beautiful every day?" "You're especially beautiful today." Her answer made me laugh again, and I bent down to kiss her lightly on the cheek. Yuer immediately burrowed into my arms and wriggled like a little fish before finally looking up to ask, "Big sister, after you marry will you still live here?" "No." "Then will you still come back?" "Of course. Bianjing is only so big. It doesn't take long to get from one place to another." Yuer thought for a moment then asked, "Will you still make wontons?" "Yes, whenever you want them, I'll make them for you." Satisfied, she nodded and hugged me. "Big sister, even after you get married I'll still love you the most in the whole world." The Gu family handled everything with remarkable speed. The wedding date was set for the 16th day of the 5th lunar month, leaving exactly 3 months to prepare. Everyone in the Zhen household became endlessly busy, and Mother worked hardest of all. Every day she rose before dawn, arranging one matter after another without pause. She reviewed the dowry list again and again, revising it over and over. Anything missing was added, anything unsuitable was immediately replaced. Sometimes she took me to choose fabric, other times to examine jewelry, and she was so busy she hardly had a moment to rest. Zhao returned every few days, each time carrying all kinds of gifts and saying Madame Zheng had sent them. Yuer was happiest of all. She proudly told everyone she met, unable to keep the news to herself. "My big sister is getting married. The man she's marrying is a teacher at the Imperial Academy. He's talented and handsome," she told her classmates, told old Zhao, who sold candied hawthorn skewers and did not even spare the big yellow cat at the mouth of the alley. The cat only meowed once, with no telling whether it understood her. Everyone in the family was delighted. I alone quietly worried about one thing. According to custom, a bride's wedding clothes were usually supposed to be embroidered by her own hand to show her sincerity. But I had wandered from place to place in my early years, and later I had spent every day busy with the Wonton shop. I had never been skilled with needle and thread, much less embroidery. Mother saw my difficulty and did not blame me. Instead, she quietly invited a skilled embroiderer in the city to the residence to personally teach me how to draw patterns, coordinate colors, thread the needle and stitch. I studied earnestly for some time, but the thread in my hands simply refused to obey. Every stitch went crooked, and the finished pattern became a hopeless tangle that truly could not be used for wedding clothes. Seeing this, Mother did not force me. She only said gently, "Take your time. As long as you've tried, that's enough. If you truly can't manage it, then when the time comes, Mother will hire the best embroiderer in Bianjing to make you a beautiful wedding outfit. I certainly won't let you be shortchanged." The days passed. I continued practicing diligently, but my skill did not improve by much. In the middle of the 4th lunar month, people from the Gu residence arrived. Leading them was Matron Zhou, old Madame Gu's close attendant. She carried an exquisite brocade box, while two older serving women behind her carried a large wooden chest draped in red silk. Mother and I hurried out to welcome them. The moment Matron Zhou saw us, she bowed with a bright smile. Her voice was full of joy. "Eldest Miss Zhen, please allow me to congratulate you in advance." I quickly returned the courtesy and asked, "Matron Zhou, have you been well lately? Is old Madam in good health?" Very well, Matron Zhou answered with a smile. "Our old Madam has been in excellent health. She especially instructed me to bring a few gifts for you." With that, she opened the brocade box. Inside was an exquisitely crafted phoenix bridal crown, decorated with phoenix-like birds entwined with branches and set with tiny pearls and smooth, lustrous jade. There were also gold hairpins, earrings, a jeweled necklace, and many other pieces of jewelry. Every item had been made with meticulous care, elegant in design and obviously precious. Before I had recovered from my surprise, Matron Zhou smiled and signaled to the two serving women behind her to open the chest. The moment the lid rose, a deep red wedding outfit appeared before my eyes. It was made of the finest gold-woven silk brocade. Gold thread had been used to embroider paired mandarin ducks, intertwined lotus blossoms, and flowering crabapple branches across the fabric, creating an effect that was both graceful and richly distinguished. Matron Zhou smiled. Young master personally went to the most famous embroidery workshop in Beijing to commission this wedding outfit. Every few days, he went back to look at it, ask about the progress, and inspect the materials. He put a great deal of thought into it. Then she looked at me and continued, "Eldest Miss Zhen, young master also asked me to pass along a message." Matron Zhou cleared her throat and imitated Guche's manner. "You don't need to worry about the wedding clothes. Just wait and don't worry. When the day comes, I will come for you." My face immediately burned, the blush spreading all the way to my ears. On the 15th day of the 5th lunar month, the day before the wedding, the Zhen household had long since completed every preparation. Everything that needed attention had been handled, and everything that needed to be purchased was ready. Yet mother still could not rest easy and personally checked it all once more. "You absolutely refused to leave my room." She lay on her stomach across my bed with her little legs swinging, repeating over and over, "Big sister, you're getting married tomorrow." I sat beside the bed and gently stroked her hair. "Even after I marry, I'll always be your big sister. But you won't live here anymore. Beijing is only so big, it won't take long to come back." Yu thought for a while, then crawled up and knelt in front of me. With a serious expression, she asked, "Big sister, will you cry tomorrow?" I considered it silently and answered, "Maybe." "Then I'll cry too." "Why would you cry?" "If you cry, I'll cry." I could not help laughing and pulled her into my arms. On the 16th day of the 5th lunar month, before the sky had even begun to lighten, the entire Zhen residence was already bustling. Mother came to wake me. When she pushed open the door, the courtyard outside was still sunk in darkness. She brought a bowl of red date soup and set it beside the bed. "Sure, it's time to get up." Layer by layer, the wedding clothes were put on me. Mother personally adjusted my sash, then stepped back several paces and looked at me for a long time, her eyes gradually reddening. "Beautiful." For the bridal preparations, mother had specially invited a happily married matron blessed with both sons and daughters, a woman known throughout Beijing for her good fortune. She brought several maids to help prepare my face, comb out my hair, and apply my makeup. Nearly 2 hours passed before everything was finished. At the auspicious hour, Big Brother was already waiting outside the door. I climbed onto his back. When he reached the doorway, his steps suddenly stopped. "Sure, you must live well from now on." "I will." My voice caught as I answered against his back, and I did not know whether he heard me clearly. The bridal sedan left the Zhen residence to the sound of horns and drums, echoing through the streets. It passed West Market, then East Market, made a circuit through the city, and only then headed toward the Gu residence. I sat inside the sedan with the lively ceremonial music filling my ears and the brilliant red of my bridal veil before my eyes. My heart beat faster and faster, full of both nervousness and confusion. I did not know how much time passed before the sedan finally stopped. A loud voice outside called, "The bride has arrived." The sedan curtain was lifted, and a hand with clearly defined knuckles reached toward me. It was Guche. He gently took my hand. At that moment, all the tension in my heart seemed to disappear. After we bowed to heaven and earth and then to our elders, he held my hand and led me through doorway after doorway into the bridal chamber. When my veil was lifted, I raised my head to look at him. He wore deep red ceremonial wedding robes that day, and looked as if he had stepped straight out of a painting. He looked at me, and I looked at him. For a moment neither of us spoke. The maids covered their mouths to hide their smiles, brought us the nuptial wine, then withdrew one after another. Silence filled the room. The only sound was the faint crackle of the wedding candles. "You look very beautiful today," My cheeks immediately grew hot. I hurriedly lowered my eyes to my skirt and answered softly, You do too. The instant the words left my mouth I regretted them. How could I use the word beautiful for a man? The thought made me want to find somewhere to hide. Then his low laugh sounded beside my ear, and a warm hand covered the back of mine. To me you're good just as you are. He bent closer, his voice gentle and lower than before. Sure, for the rest of my life I will keep you safe and give you a lifetime of complete happiness. I raised my eyes and met his deep gaze. Before I could react, he gently drew me into his arms. The red candlelight flickered, casting two shadows on the wall that slowly merged into one. The Gu residence was somewhat larger than the Zhen residence, but there were not many people in the household. Old Madame Gu was afraid I would not yet be accustomed to everything as a new bride, so she specially ordered Matron Zhou to bring several maids to serve me. I quick said, There's no need, I can manage everything myself. Old Madame Gu replied, You're now the wife of the Gu family's eldest young master. You can't personally handle everything anymore. You don't even need to give these girls orders. They know what they should do. Sure enough, the maids were all quick and capable. They made the bed, folded the quilts, served tea, and poured water without needing me to worry about anything. Instead, I was the one who felt unaccustomed, sitting still while other people busied themselves in front of me. Unable to put my hands to any task, always felt strange, as if I were still an outsider in this house. Gu Che noticed my discomfort and said, If you have nothing to do, you could bring lunch to me at noon. The food at the Imperial Academy doesn't suit my taste. If you cook and bring it over, I won't need to eat there. The next morning, I rose early and went into the kitchen to prepare food. Matron Zhou arranged a carriage to take me to the Imperial Academy. The Imperial Academy stood in the eastern part of the city, not far from the Gu residence. The carriage arrived in less than the time needed to drink a cup of tea. I got out holding the food box and stood at the gate for a moment, slightly hesitant. A gatekeeper saw me and came over. Madam, whom are you looking for? I'm looking for Gu Che, I replied. Teacher Gu? The gatekeeper repeated. After a slight pause, I added, I've come to bring him lunch. The gatekeeper looked at me, then at the food box in my hands, and immediately understood. He smiled. So you're Teacher Gu's wife. Please come in. Teacher Gu's quarters are in the third room on the eastern side. Holding the food box, I went inside. The Imperial Academy truly was enormous. Courtyard followed courtyard, linked by long covered walkways. I wandered for quite some time before finally finding the third room on the eastern side. The door stood open. Gu Che sat inside with his head lowered writing. I stopped outside and gently knocked on the doorframe. He looked up, and the moment he saw me, he immediately set down his brush and stood. You're here. I stepped inside, set the food box on the table and opened it. Eat while it's hot, it won't taste as good once it cools. He had only been eating for a short while when a small head suddenly appeared outside the door. It belonged to a boy of about 15 or 16 wearing a blue student's robe, his face full of curiosity. Teacher, who is this? Gu Che put down his spoon. The gentleness around him vanished at once, replaced by his usual stern expression. His brows drew together slightly. Greet your teacher's wife. The boy's mouth fell open. He hurriedly clasped his hands and bowed. Greetings, teacher's wife. Before he could leave, several more heads appeared behind him one after another, all scrambling to bow. Greetings, teacher's wife. Greetings, teacher's wife. Greetings, teacher's wife. For a moment I did not know how to react and could only answer, Greetings to all of you too. Gu Che spoke coolly. Enough, go back all of you. The students immediately scattered amid noisy laughter and chatter. Once the door closed, Gu Che put down his spoon, took my hand and asked in a low voice, Did they startle you? If these students aren't kept under strict discipline, they forget the rules. I shook my head. No. When I packed up the food box and prepared to leave, Gu Che stood and walked me out. He looked around. Seeing no one nearby, he lowered his voice. Come again tomorrow. I deliberately turned my face away and pretended to be displeased. I'm not coming anymore. Your students are frightening. The moment he heard that, Gu Che became anxious and stepped half a pace closer to explain. They usually aren't like that. Outsiders rarely come to the Imperial Academy, so they were probably only curious. Don't take it to heart. Looking at the worry clearly showing between his brows, I had not yet said anything when he gently took hold of my wrist and looked at me intently. I want to see you every day. Embarrassed, I lowered my head and murmured, Don't we see each other when you return home every evening? Unconcealed longing appeared in Gu Che's eyes. I want to see you at noon too. Otherwise I miss you. Because of that one sentence, from then on I brought him lunch at the Imperial Academy every day. Sometimes it was wontons, sometimes dumplings, and sometimes several small dishes with a flask of hot soup. Seeing this, old Madame Gu asked, Sure, you run to the Imperial Academy every day. Aren't you tired? I answered, Not at all. She merely smiled. As long as you aren't tired. A moment later she gave a leisurely sigh. Youth really is wonderful. No matter what you do, nothing ever seems tiring.